The ship overseer's expression also changed slightly upon seeing this. If these sand beasts were to bite their way through the dragon bone frame of the ship, the entire ship would become extremely frail, and it would completely fall apart before it reached the primordial land. A grim look appeared on his face as he flew out of the ship, then descended out of the sky like lightning. These sand beasts and man-faced scorpions were quite sensitive to cultivators, and as soon as they detected the ship overseer's aura, they immediately converged toward him at once. Circles of black ripples instantly began surging out of the ship overseer's body, completely encompassing both himself and the ship. He had unleashed his spirit domain, but it was clear that he didn't want to cause too much of a commotion, as evidenced by the fact that the spirit domain encompassed only an area of 100 feet around the ship. As soon as the surrounding demon beasts rushed into the spirit domain, they were immediately ensnared by wisps of black mist, following which their bodies were corroded and liquefied. The three larger sand beasts were slightly more powerful than their brethren, but even they weren't able to get within 30 feet of the ship overseer before their bodies also disintegrated. Is that a spirit domain? That's incredible. As expected of a golden, immortal stage ship overseer. Ali. All of the passengers on the ship were full of praise upon seeing this. However, right at this moment, Han Li's expression suddenly changed slightly, and he grabbed onto Jin Tong before darting back in retreat as quickly as he could. Immediately thereafter, the sea of sand in front of the ship abruptly erupted like a volcano, sending vast volumes of sand flying in all directions and flinging countless man-faced scorpions and sand beasts into the air. In the next instant, an enormous sand beast that was over twice the size of the ship rushed out of the sea of sand. Its enormous mouth seemed to be capable of devouring heaven and earth, and it swooped down toward the ship with tremendous power. An alarmed and horrified look appeared on the ship overseer's face upon seeing this, and he immediately attempted to flee, only for a dark red vortex to suddenly take shape within the sand beast's gargantuan mouth. The vortex was giving off bursts of tremendous suction force that completely disregarded his spirit domain and immobilized him on the spot. With just a single bite, the sand beast was able to devour the ship overseer alongside half of the entire ship. The severely damaged ship immediately began plummeting toward the sea of sand, and passengers on board had no chance to escape before they were completely inundated by sand beasts and man-faced scorpions. A chorus of agonized howls rang out as the strong stench of blood spread through the air. Aside from over 100 true immortal cultivators who had reacted quite quickly and managed to survive the ordeal, all of the other passengers had been killed in the blink of an eye. "Run!" someone yelled, and all of the true immortals immediately fled in all directions in a blind panic. Amid the chaos, a strange thought occurred to Han Li. Where is Shi Chuan-Kong? Shi Chuan-Kong hadn't appeared at all ever since the beginning of this incident, and Han Li was certain that he wouldn't have fallen to his demise so easily. However, there was no time to ponder such matters as Han Li prepared to flee toward the primordial land with Jin Tong, only to find that the giant sand beast was rushing directly at them. Han Li's pupils contracted slightly upon seeing this. The sand beast was quite formidable, but it was only at the mid-golden immortal stage, so it naturally posed no threat to him. Right as he was about to engage it in battle, Jin Tong's voice suddenly rang out beside his ears. "I'll take on that thing, uncle." Jin Tong's eyes were glowing with excitement, and she sprang forward before Han Li had a chance to say anything, transforming into a golden beetle before pouncing at the giant sand beast. Han Li hesitated slightly upon seeing this, but ultimately made no attempt to stop her as he watched her while standing in midair with his hands clasped behind his back. Jin Tong slashed a pair of front legs through the air mid-flight, and hundreds of streaks of translucent golden light shot forth through the air. then dispersed before hurtling toward the sand beast from either direction. The sand beast seemed to have realized that Jin Tong was a formidable opponent, and it stopped cold in its tracks, then conjured up two thick pillars of swirling sand that swept toward the oncoming streaks of translucent golden light. A layer of yellow light emerged over the surface of each pillar of sand, and the yellow light was giving off bursts of law power fluctuations. Golden light flashed within Jin Tong's eyes as the streaks of golden light brightened considerably, then fused together to form two enormous streaks of light that were several thousand feet in length each before striking the two pillars of sand. As soon as the two came into contact with one another, the two giant streaks of golden light were able to slice through the pillars of sand in an instant, and they weren't even slowed down in the slightest as they continued to hurtle toward the giant sand beast. The sand beast didn't take any evasive measures. Instead, another dark red vortex took shape within its enormous mouth, this one far brighter than the one that it had used to kill the ship overseer. A burst of tremendous suction force surged out of its mouth in a frenzy, instantly sucking in the two streaks of golden light, which flew into the vortex before vanishing without a trace. A hint of surprise appeared in Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, but he still displayed no intention of entering the fray. Bright golden light erupted out of Jin Tong's body, and it transformed into a huge ball of golden light as it flew toward the sand beast, which opened its mouth up even wider, while the dark red vortex inside grew even brighter. A burst of suction force that was several times stronger than before enveloped the ball of golden light, and the nearby space was collapsing in on itself. The ball of golden light was sucked into the sand beast's mouth in a flash, and the white jade pendant hanging from Han Li's waist flashed momentarily before the Pixiu's concerned voice rang out from within it. "Are you not going to save her, Master?" "There's no need for that," Han Li replied with a faint smile. But before the Pixiu had a chance to say anything further, an agonized roar suddenly erupted out of the giant sand beast's mouth, and it collapsed onto the sea of sand before writhing and squirming violently, as if it were enduring some type of immense pain. A dull thump then rang out as a streak of radiant golden light shot out of the sand beast's body, punching a huge hole into it. Vast volumes of viscous white liquid came pouring out of the wound, and it was unclear if this was blood or something else. Another string of dull thumps rang out as more bursts of golden light erupted out of Sand Beast's body, and before long, its entire body was riddled with holes. Its thrashing became even more violent as it let loose a thunderous blood-curdling howl. "Looks like I got worried for nothing," the Pixiu grumbled before falling silent again. Finally, the giant sand beast let loose one final roar before its body exploded into countless chunks of flesh, following which Jin Tong flew out from its remains. It was looking a little worse for wear, with several patches of its golden exoskeleton looking rather dull, as if it had been corroded, but these were only minor injuries. At this moment, it was holding a yellow crystal the size of a human head, within which was a vortex of dark red light that was giving off bursts of formidable law power fluctuations. It seemed that the crisis had been averted, but Han Li was looking a little concerned. He felt like there was something abnormal about the roar that the sand beast had let loose prior to its death. Jin Tong flew back to Han Li's side, then flew in a circle around him before asking, "I killed it, Uncle. Do I get a reward?" "Once we get out of here, you can eat to your heart's content," Han Li promised with an amused smile, then reached out toward the yellow crystal that Jin Tong was holding. "Let me take a look at that crystal." "No, it's mine." Jin Tong flew back so that she was out of Han Li's reach, then reverted back into her human form, following which the yellow crystal was stowed away amid a flash of golden light. Han Li could only shake his head with a resigned expression as he said, "Let's get out of here." Right at this moment, the entire sea of sand began to rumble and tremble without any warning, and huge waves of sand erupted into the sky. At the same time, a tremendous aura emerged beneath the sea of sand before approaching at an incredible speed. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and he hurriedly grabbed onto Jin Tong, while his thunderstorm wings appeared on his back. Immediately thereafter, he vanished from the spot amid a flash of lightning. In the same instant, the sea of sand down below exploded, and an enormous head shot out from down below before chomping down viciously. But at this point, Han Li was already gone, so it bit down onto nothing. Close to 100 kilometers away, Han Li re-emerged amid a flash of lightning. The giant head that had just attempted to swallow him whole belonged to another gargantuan sand beast, this one at least 10 times the size of the one that Jin Tong had just slain. The sand beast was giving off an immense aura that was infinitely approaching the high zenith stage, and a grim look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, but he didn't immediately flee the scene. The sea of sand was completely unfamiliar to him, and if he were to flee blindly without any direction, he could run into even more trouble. The mountainous sand beast had no eyes, but Han Li could sense its fury. All of a sudden, it opened its enormous mouth before letting loose a deafening roar, causing the nearby space to tremble and buzz violently. Before Han Li had a chance to react, the head of the massive sand beast shot out of the sea of sand before pouncing at Han Li's duo. Despite its tremendous size, it was as fast as lightning, and it reached no more than 100 feet away from Han Li and Jin Tong in the blink of an eye. Bright golden light erupted out of Han Li's body as he shot back in retreat, while the giant sand beast opened its mouth to conjure up a gargantuan dark red vortex. At this point, Han Li Jin Tong had only managed to fly no more than 10 kilometers away, and they were immediately caught within a burst of incredibly powerful suction force. Han Li felt the surrounding air constrict around him, and he was stopped cold in his tracks before being sucked toward the giant sand beast's mouth by the massive vortex. A fierce look flashed through Jin Tong's eyes as she prepared to pounce at the sand beast, only to be stopped by Han Li, who cast an incantation seal onto her, transforming her into a ring that fitted itself around his finger. At this point, Han Li wasn't that far away from the giant sand beast to begin with, and instead of attempting to flee, he flew toward it instead, reaching its enormous mouth in the blink of an eye. Immediately thereafter, a burst of golden ripples erupted out of his body before spreading rapidly in all directions, instantly forming a golden spirit domain that was close to 20 kilometers in size, encompassing a small section of the sand beast's body within it. Everything within the golden spirit domain was instantly slowed down significantly, including the suction force surging out of the massive sand beast's mouth. As a result, Han Li was able to steady himself before using his thunderstorm wings once again, vanishing on the spot before appearing behind the mountainous sand beast's head amid a rumbling thunderclap. Immediately thereafter, he let loose a low roar as he adopted his giant mountain ape form. At the same time, a giant green sword appeared in the golden ape's grasp before it was swung at the sand beast with tremendous power. An incredibly thick crescent-shaped dark green sword projection swept through the air, containing countless dark green runes that were giving off bursts of formidable law power fluctuations. The mountainous sand beast immediately attempted to take evasive measures as it dodged to the side, and at the same time, a translucent yellow membrane of light emerged over the skin on the back of its head. However, with its enormous body and crippling effect of Han Li's time-spirit domain, its evasive measures proved to be completely futile, and the sword projection struck the back of its head with immense power. The translucent yellow membrane flashed erratically as it attempted to keep the sword projection at bay, but it was only able to last an instant before it was severed. The crescent-shaped sword projection sliced into the sand beast's body, inflicting an enormous wound that was close to 1,000 feet in length, and yellow blood immediately came gushing out from within, but Han Li wasn't elated at all to see this. Relative to the sand beast's gargantuan body, this was nothing more than a minor gash. The giant sand beast let loose a thunderous roar, as if it had been enraged by the injury, and bright yellow light erupted out of its body with countless yellow runes swirling within it. The yellow light expanded outward in all directions, instantly forming a yellow spirit domain that was close to 100 kilometers in radius. As soon as Han Li was encompassed within the yellow spirit domain, he immediately felt the surrounding gravity increase by several hundredfold. Before he had a chance to do anything, a thunderous howling sound rang out, and he turned to discover that the sand beast's tail, which wasn't encompassed within his time-spirit domain, was sweeping toward him with devastating power. Upon entering the time-spirit domain, the tail was slowed down significantly, but it was still sweeping through the air with astonishing speed and power. Han Li was also bogged down by the heightened gravitational force, so evasion was not an option for him, and he could only lash out with the giant green sword in his hand. A resounding boom rang out as the nearby space shuddered, and the golden ape was sent flying by the mountainous tail like a giant rag doll, before slamming heavily into the sea of sand down below. Half of its body sank into the sea of sand, while golden blood trickled down from the corner of its lips, and the webbing between the thumb and index finger of its sword-wielding hand had also been torn open, but that was the extent of its injuries. At this moment, the sea of sand was swirling like water, forming a giant vortex that enveloped the giant golden ape before attempting to suck it into the depths. At the same time, several sand beasts abruptly sprang out of the nearby sand to pounce at Han Li. These sand beasts weren't particularly massive, but they were entirely formed by sand, and they were giving off enormous golden immortal stage auras. At this point, the mountainous sand beast had also turned to Han Li and was chomping down upon him once again. At the same time, the flesh on either side of the gash on the back of its head was quickly fusing together, and it wasn't going to be long before the entire wound was healed. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he slashed his giant green sword horizontally through the air. At the same time, 3 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords emerged around him amid a flash of azure light before also sweeping through the air, unleashing bursts of peerlessly sharp sword chi that tore the surrounding sand apart. As a result, Han Li was freed from the sand, and bright golden lightning instantly erupted out of his thunderstorm wings. However, his lightning power was suppressed by the sand beast's spirit domain, so it was only around 30% as effective as it normally was. In the next instant, Han Li vanished from the spot amid a flash of golden lightning before reappearing close to 10 kilometers away, which wasn't very far, but it allowed him to avoid the terrible fate of being devoured by the gargantuan sand beast. His thunderstorm wings then lit up once again, and he began fleeing rapidly into the distance as an arc of golden lightning. The giant sand beast let loose a thunderous roar of fury as it set off in pursuit, but its speed was slightly lackluster compared with Han Li's. After using his thunderstorm wings several times in succession, Han Li was finally able to fly out of the sand beast's spirit domain. With another flash of golden lightning, he appeared several thousand kilometers away, far away from the giant sand beast. Immediately thereafter, he swept a sleeve through the air, and arcs of golden lightning sprang out of his body to form a lightning teleportation formation. With a flash of lightning and a resounding thunderclap, Han Li vanished into thin air, having teleported himself out of the giant sand beast's spiritual sensory range. The mountainous sand beast let loose a thunderous roar of fury as it slammed its giant tail into the sea of sand in frustration, causing all of the sand in a radius of thousands of kilometers to churn and rumble like turbulent waves. Ali. In the sky above a dense forest, a ball of golden lightning emerged amid a burst of spatial fluctuations, then expanded to form a golden lightning formation. Han Li appeared within the formation, having already reverted back to his human form, while the giant green sword and his 3 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords were circling around him. He swept a sleeve through the air to stow the swords away, then released his spiritual sense to inspect his surroundings, and he heaved an internal sigh of relief upon confirming that he had shaken the sand beast off their trail. Jin Tong immediately flew off his finger, then yelled, "Why did you run away, uncle? You could have let that thing swallow me, and I would have taken it down from the inside. That smaller sand beast was already powerful enough to injure you. The larger one would have surely been even more dangerous. I wasn't going to let you take the risk," Han Li replied with a shake of his head. "Master is right. Safety should always be our top priority, so there's no need to take such risks," the Jade Pixiu chimed in. "Zio Bai, are you saying that I'm being stupid and unreasonable? I think you need to be taught a lesson." Jin Tong yelled as she pounced onto the Han Li's leg, then threatened to bite into the white jade pendant that was hanging from his waist. The Pixiu immediately yelled in alarm before begging for mercy. Han Li picked Jin Tong up by grabbing onto her braids as if he were plucking a radish out of the ground, then scolded, "Be quiet, you two. We're already in the primordial land now, so we have to be careful." Jin Tong didn't say anything further, but she was still making menacing expressions as the white jade pendant, while the Pixiu had fallen completely silent. Han Li shook his head with an exasperated expression, then began to inspect his surroundings. They were well and truly in the primordial land now, and they were currently situated in a vast primordial forest that spread as far as the eyes could see in all directions. The world's origin chi here was just as abundant as some of the most prominent spirit veins in the northern glacial Immortal region, but it was rather chaotic and unstable. The Pixiu emerged beside Han Li amid a flash of white light, then closed its eyes while inhaling deeply as a blissful look appeared on its face. Han Li scanned the landscape down below for a moment, then descended onto a branch of a huge banyan tree. The tree was at least 1,000 feet tall, and this branch was very spacious, able to seat 10 people side by side with no problems whatsoever. These banyan trees were quite prevalent in some of the warmer and more temperate places on the northern glacial Immortal region, but this one was at least 10 times larger than even the most massive banyan trees on the northern glacial Immortal region. An intrigued look appeared on Han Li's face as he inspected his surroundings. Not only was this banyan tree absolutely enormous, all of the other trees that were recognizable to him were also far more massive than they were elsewhere. In fact, the same applied to all of the plants in this forest, making Han Li feel as if he had somehow been shrunk down to the size of an ant. Of course, there were also some smaller trees in the area, but there weren't many of them. "This place looks pretty cool," Jin Tong remarked as she also inspected her surroundings with an amazed expression. "Are all of the plants in the primordial land so abnormally huge?" Han Li asked. "This is how things are everywhere in the primordial land. On the contrary, I would argue that the trees everywhere else are abnormally small," the Pixiu replied. Han Li nodded to himself with a contemplative expression upon seeing this. "Master, all of the demon beasts here are extremely violent and bloodthirsty, so make sure to be careful when traveling through the primordial land," the Pixiu continued. "All right, I'll make sure to be on my guard," Han Li replied with a nod. As soon as his voice trailed off, a ferocious roar rang out from nearby, and Black Ape that was around 20 feet tall with a dark red horn on its head sprang out from behind a nearby tree, then pounced at Han Li with its claws brandished. Han Li remained still on the spot as he flicked a finger through the air, releasing a streak of azure light that instantly split the black ape's body in half, sending blood splattering in all directions. "You certainly weren't kidding about their violent tendencies," Han Li remarked as he turned his gaze away from the black ape's remains. In any case, they had finally left the northern glacial Immortal region, so he didn't have to worry about the heavenly court for now, and that was a very pleasant thought for him. The primordial land was fraught with peril, but with his current powers, he was confident that he would be able to survive. After taking a deep breath, he flipped a hand over to summon two objects, one of which was the map that had been given to him by Worm 3, while the other was another map that he had purchased in Primordial Origin City. He inspected both maps briefly before stowing them away again, then swept a sleeve through the air to summon the green jade flying carriage. "Let's go," he instructed. The primordial land was a very dangerous place, but the fact that it was very rarely frequented by cultivators had to mean that there were many precious treasures and resources waiting to be uncovered. With that in mind, a sense of excitement welled up in his heart. Jin Tong and the Pixiu also seemed to be quite excited, and they immediately jumped onto the carriage. Han Li cast an incantation seal onto the flying carriage, and it immediately sped away as a streak of green light. Not long after the green jade flying carriage sped away into the distance, the spirit patterns on its surface flashed momentarily, following which a cloud of white mist emerged to encompass the entire carriage. This wasn't just a normal white cloud. Instead, it was able to conceal all of the spiritual power fluctuations emanating from the flying carriage. From the outside, the carriage appeared no different from a normal cloud, and it was flying through the forest in a stealthy fashion without giving off any energy fluctuations. Han Li gave a pleased nod upon seeing this. As expected of a transportation treasure used by Gong Shujiu, the carriage had many brilliant uses, and even now, he still hadn't fully grasped all of the carriage's abilities. As the carriage sped through the air, Han Li released his spiritual sense to inspect his surroundings, trying to ascertain their location as soon as possible. After flying for close to half a day, an elated look suddenly appeared on Han Li's face, and the carriage began to fly to the left at his behest. Shortly thereafter, a massive swamp emerged. The ground in the swamp was a peculiar black color, and all of the vegetation inside was also black while giving off a putrid odor. This swamp was most likely the black mud swamp recorded on the map, and it was still quite far away from the route provided to him by Worm 3. In any case, it had allowed Han Li to ascertain his current location, and he cast an incantation seal into his flying carriage, upon which it immediately accelerated even further. "This swamp looks really interesting, Uncle. There should be a lot of good stuff inside. Are we not going to take a look?" Jin Tong suddenly asked. The black mud swamp has already been annotated on the map, so I'm assuming many primordial hunters have come here in the past. Hence, there's no need to waste our time here. There will be many more places for us to visit in search for treasures anyway, Han Li replied with a shake of his head. "You're right, let's keep going," Jin Tong said with an eager expression. "Pixiu, you told me that you're very adept in searching for natural treasures and resources. This is your time to shine. I'll give you 30% of all of the treasures that we find," Han Li said. "Really?" the Pixiu asked in a shocked voice as it instantly stood up. "Of course," Han Li replied with a smile. "All right, I'm on it," the Pixiu replied, and its eyes were glowing with excitement. "I want some too, Uncle," Jin Tong yelled in protest. "You'll definitely get your share as well, but only if you contribute and don't slack off," Han Li said with a smile. Jin Tong immediately nodded vigorously in response. 5 days later, a vast mountain range appeared before Han Li. The mountain range wasn't all that tall or remarkable, but the gaps between the mountains were filled with dense black mist, making it very difficult to see the mountains, thereby enshrouding the entire mountain range in a sense of mystery. "We're finally here," Han Li gently exhaled as he cast his gaze toward the misty mountain range. This was one of the points on the route supplied to him by Worm 3. Even though the route given to him by Worm 3 wasn't necessarily a truly safe one, he had no choice but to follow it. "Ali, Master, there's a great abundance of water attribute spiritual chi in this mountain range. I've already sensed many spirit materials in here. Should we begin?" the Pixiu asked while sniffing at the air. "All right, let's start here," Han Li replied with a nod, then made a hand seal, and the green jade flying carriage descended into the mountain range. Thanks to the cloud of mist around the flying carriage, they hadn't been attacked by any primordial beasts, and at this point, they had already made it quite far into the primordial land. In the beginning, Han Li had been able to spot the occasional primordial hunter, but as they traveled deeper into the primordial land, that was no longer the case. At this point, there was no need to be in a hurry. After flying into the sea of mist within the mountain range, the flying carriage became even more well concealed, and the Pixiu was scouring the area while continuing to sniff at the air as it said. Around 1,500 kilometers directly up ahead is a spirit plant that should be over 100,000 years of age. The flying carriage set off in that direction at Han Li's behest, then quickly descended in front of a hollow inside a mountain stream. In a secretive location within the hollow was a dark red spirit plant that resembled a deer antler that had been carved out of red jade. A vast abundance of spiritual chi was emanating from the spirit plant, and Jin Tong's eyes immediately lit up upon taking a whiff. "This is a deer antler herb," Han Li remarked. This spirit plant could be used to refine some recovery pills at or above the true immortal stage, so it was very highly sought after, and the fact that it was a specimen that was over 100,000 years old only made it even more precious. Right at this moment, a low roar rang out from within the mountain stream, and a giant green python that was several hundred feet in length sprang out before pouncing directly at Han Li. The giant python possessed a formidable true immortal stage aura, but Han Li was completely unfazed as he swept a sleeve through the air, upon which an azure flying sword flew out before sweeping over the python's body like lightning. The giant python instantly stiffened before its head separated from its body, and it began to thrash and struggle violently while blood gushed out of its decapitation wound. Han Li paid no heed to the python as he slowly uprooted the deer antler herb, then stowed it away before continuing onward. Over an hour later, the Pixiu declared, "I can sense some precious spirit materials underground around 1,000 kilometers to our left." Han Li quickly arrived at the specified location, then descended into the ground, and before long, he re-emerged with a fist-sized blue stone in his hand. The sound of countless splashing waves could be heard coming from within the stone, and it was as if there were an entire large river inside. This was a 1,000-fold profound water crystal that was an exceptional material for refining water attribute immortal treasures, and it was a great find for Han Li. Ali, in the blink of an eye, close to an entire month had already passed by since Han Li entered this mountain range. The Pixiu hadn't been exaggerating at all about its treasure-hunting abilities, and at this point, they had already collected a massive bounty of close to 100 spirit plants and materials. The mountain range was enormous, and as they had been searching for treasures this entire time, they were advancing quite slowly, so they had only just reached the central region of the mountain range. "Master, I can sense some spirit plants about 1,500 kilometers up ahead, and there appears to be about 20 to 30 of them," the Pixiu declared in a slightly surprised voice. Han Li's eyes immediately lit up upon hearing this, and a short while later, the flying carriage descended into a basin. At the center of the basin was a plot of flat land that had a light purple hue, and there were indeed 20 to 30 purple spirit plants growing here, all of which were releasing abundant spiritual chi and giving off a strong fragrance. "These are serene purple herbs," Han Li exclaimed with an ecstatic expression. This was one of the main ingredients used to refine heavenly luster pills, so it was certainly a pleasant surprise to be stumbling upon so many of them here. He immediately swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of azure light to collect the serene purple herbs, but right at this moment, countless thin streaks of blue light erupted out of the ground near the basin before hurtling directly toward him. These streaks of blue light were no less powerful than attacks unleashed by the average golden immortal, and Han Li was very much caught off guard by this. Upon descending into the basin, he had already scoured the area with his spiritual sense, and he hadn't detected anyone here. Despite this, he was still able to react in a timely fashion, and he was just about to defend himself when Jin Tong suddenly flew up from the carriage as she said, "I'll take care of this, uncle." She then flicked her delicate little fingers through the air to release countless streaks of translucent golden light, which intertwined with one another to form a giant golden lotus flower in the path of the streaks of blue light. The streaks of blue light struck the golden lotus flower in rapid succession, and the latter only shuddered slightly before it was able to ward off the former with ease. Han Li took a glance in Jin Tong's direction, then turned his gaze back to the serene purple herbs. A burst of azure light flew out of his hand, forming a giant azure palm projection that gently scooped up the serene purple herbs along with the purple spirit soil beneath them. By the time he flew back to the flying carriage, the beings that had attacked him had already revealed themselves. As it turned out, it was a group of 4 or 5 giant apes with blue fur that stood at around 70 to 80 feet tall. These blue apes were shimmering with blue light and giving off true immortal stage auras, while their leader possessed golden immortal stage powers. The apes were seemingly chanting an incantation in some type of unintelligible language, and thin threads of blue light shot out of their bodies to form a ball of blue light in front of them. The blue apes were furious to see Han Li stowing away the serene purple herbs, and the ball of blue light in front of them instantly brightened significantly as a flurry of threads of blue light shot out from within. At the same time, the leader of the blue apes opened its mouth to release a burst of blue light, which transformed into a giant blue blade that was over 1,000 feet in length before sweeping toward Han Li and Jin Tong. Jin Tong harumphed coldly as she switched to a different hand seal, and countless streaks of translucent golden light shot out of the stamen of the golden lotus flower before clashing against the oncoming streaks of blue light. The streaks of golden light were extremely dense and sharp, warding off the streaks of blue light with ease before quickly forcing them back. Immediately thereafter, the streaks of golden light crashed into the giant blue blade, punching countless holes into the blade before destroying it altogether. The wave of golden light then instantly descended upon the group of blue apes, which began to howl in agony, but a layer of blue light then abruptly emerged over their bodies. A string of resounding booms rang out as their bodies exploded into streams of blue light that burrowed into the ground in a flash. As soon as these streams of light surged into the ground, the auras of the blue apes instantly became one with that of the water veins underground, making it impossible to detect them. All of this had taken place so abruptly and was so unexpected that Han Li was left feeling quite surprised, and he finally realized why he hadn't detected these blue apes earlier. As soon as the blue apes burrowed into the ground, they immediately fled into the distance at an astonishing speed. Han Li was looking on with a contemplative expression, but made no effort to pursue them. These blue apes' concealment ability was quite profound, but he could still just barely detect their presence. However, He had no intention of hunting them down. Jin Tong's senses weren't as sharp as Han Li's, and she immediately turned to him with a furious expression, clearly awaiting directions from him. "Let them go," Han Li said with a shake of his head. "Why aren't we chasing after them?" Jin Tong asked in an indignant manner. "Those things aren't normal primordial beasts. Instead, I have a feeling that they come from a nearby primordial tribe, so it won't be wise to blindly pursue them," Han Li explained. "So what? I can take on 1,000 of these blue monkeys at once," Jin Tong grumbled as she raised her little fist. "Don't underestimate these primordial beings. This is their home turf, and there's often great strength to be found in numbers. I'm sure there's no lack of formidable beings among them. Just like that sand beast we encountered earlier. Our objective is to pass through the primordial land, so it would be unwise to seek out trouble," Han Li said. Jin Tong's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, and she didn't raise any further argument. "It seems like you know quite a bit about the state of the primordial world, Master," the Pixiu remarked. "We're going to be traversing through the primordial land for quite some time, so I naturally had to do some homework," Han Li replied with a smile. In reality, he hadn't actually managed to find much information about the primordial land while in Primordial Origin City. In the end, he was only able to gather some valuable information from the Transient Guild at quite a high cost. "Let's go. The primordial tribes here sorely detest primordial hunters, so I'm sure those things will be bringing back reinforcements soon," Han Li continued. "This is so boring. I'm a little sleepy, uncle. Call on me again when there's something fun happening." Jin Tong gave an unenthusiastic yawn as she spoke, then transformed into a golden ring that fitted itself around Han Li's finger. Han Li then made a hand seal, and the flying carriage continued onward. In order to avoid the reinforcements from the blue ape-like beings from earlier, they temporarily refrained from continuing their treasure-hunting endeavors. Instead, they traveled onward at full speed, and it didn't take long before they left the misty mountain range. After leaving the mountain range, the terrain up ahead instantly became a lot more level, and it didn't take long before a slightly dark forest appeared up ahead. From a distance, the trees in the forest appeared to be dark gray in color, and the foliage was very dense, so even though it was daytime, there was still a dark and foreboding aura about the forest. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, but he still spurred the flying carriage onward to fly into the forest. "Something's not quite right here. The world's origin chi in this forest is quite abundant, but I can't sense any spirit materials," the Pixiu suddenly said after they had been flying for some time. At this point, Han Li had also developed a sense that there was something strange about this forest. Not only were there very few spirit plants in the forest, his spiritual sense told him that there were any primordial beasts around, either. However, Han Li didn't pay this much heed. The lack of primordial beasts was something that he was happy to see, as it would allow him to travel through the forest faster. After flying for close to half a day, the Pixiu abruptly stood up as it declared in an excited voice, "I can sense extremely powerful spiritual chi fluctuations coming from the left. There must be something incredibly precious there." A hesitant look appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing this, but after a brief moment of contemplation, he still redirected the flying carriage to set off in that direction. Before long, a dead black swamp had appeared up ahead. The swamp was filled with decaying black mud, and it was completely desolate and devoid of life. Occasionally, a large bubble would rise up from the mud, then pop loudly to release plumes of dark purple miasma. "Didn't you say there was something of value here?" Han Li asked with slightly furrowed brows. His spiritual sense was telling him that the world's origin chi here was much sparser than it was in the rest of the forest, and he couldn't even sense any living beings here, let alone any precious natural treasures. I'm certain that there's something deep in the swamp. If we find something good this time, don't forget that I was the one who led us here," the Pixiu declared in a confident manner. Han Li was still rather skeptical upon hearing this, but spurred on the flying carriage to continue onward, nonetheless. After flying for a while, his expression suddenly changed slightly as he brought the flying carriage to a halt. In this area, the dark purple miasma over the swamp had become extremely dense, making this place as dark as if it were night time. Han Li was unbothered by this miasma, and the flying carriage descended out of the sky at his behest, then stopped over 100 feet above the swamp. There were countless carcasses in the swamp down below, most of which were already severely decayed, but he could still tell that they belonged to various types of demon beasts. These carcasses all varied in size from just over 100 feet to in excess of 1,000 feet in size, and there were countless more of these carcasses up ahead, stretching as far as the eyes could see. The Pixiu seemed to be quite startled by this, and it didn't dare to say anything as it snuck a furtive glance at Han Li out of the corner of its eye. Han Li's expression remained unchanged, and after a brief pause, the flying carriage continued onward. The further they ventured into the swamp, the more demon beasts' carcasses that they saw until eventually, the entire swamp was completely filled with them, and the air temperature was also dropping sharply. "Is it still further up ahead?" Han Li asked. "Well, yes, but this place is a little scary, so maybe we should turn back," the Pixiu replied in an uneasy voice. "I hope you're right," Han Li said. Having already come this far, he was naturally unwilling to turn back. According to past experience, all precious natural treasures were guarded by powerful beasts. However, whatever guardian beast was here seemed to be quite formidable and was also very adept at concealing itself, to the point that Han Li still hadn't managed to detect it. However, at this point in the primordial land, he had a feeling that he possessed sufficient power to at least ensure self-preservation, and if he encountered a foe too powerful for him to defeat, then he would just have to run away. With that in mind, Han Li continued onward atop his flying carriage, but he had slowed down quite a bit and was also proceeding with caution. Some time later, the flying carriage drew to a halt at his behest. They had already ventured very deep into the swamp at this point, and there was an astonishing number of demon beasts' carcasses here, forming a series of massive mountains of bones. Additionally, the carcasses here were also far more massive than the ones from before, and the area was littered with giant skeletons the size of mountains. Even Han Li was beginning to get a little spooked. "Master, the treasure is right there," the Pixiu suddenly declared as it pointed forward. Between two massive mountains of bones, several kilometers up ahead, was a green pond that was several dozen feet in size, and the water in the pond was so clear that one could see all the way to the bottom. At the center of the pond was a shimmering golden lotus flower with 9 petals, all of which were also golden in color, but in different shades. Despite this, they somehow didn't appear to conflict with each other at all. There were also 9 golden rainbows of different shades hanging in the air above the lotus flower, and the flying carriage immediately began to approach it at Han Li's behest. Even as they were still several thousand feet away, Han Li could already catch a whiff of an incredibly fragrant aroma from the golden lotus flower, and just this aroma alone was enough to loosen several of the immortal acupoints in his body ever so slightly. He had no idea what this golden lotus flower was, but its aroma alone told him that it was definitely an exceptional spirit plant. Right as he was about to get even closer, a piercing screech suddenly rang out from the distant sky. As soon as he heard this screech, his soul abruptly shuddered, while his body began to sway unsteadily. However, with his tremendous spiritual sense, he was immediately able to steady himself, following which he looked up to find that a giant black beast had appeared up above. The black beast had an enormous body that wasn't inferior in size compared with the giant sand beast in the sea of sand, and it resembled a worm with a layer of huge black scales all over its body, each of which was over 100 feet in size. There were also several huge black bone spikes that were thousands of feet in length on its head, and its 4 sets of claws were astonishingly enormous. The black worm was staring intently at the golden lotus flower with a greedy look on its face, but its gaze then immediately fell upon Han Li as a ferocious gleam surfaced in its eyes. "Oh, I'm also feeling a little sleepy, master," the Pixiu exclaimed in alarm, then instantly flew back to Han Li's waist as a jade pendant. Before Han Li had a chance to do anything, a gust of scorching wind swept toward him as the black worm whipped its tail at him with astonishing power. Han Li felt the air constrict around him, and the giant draconic tail arrived before him in the blink of an eye, sweeping toward him with devastating power. His expression changed drastically as he hurriedly swept a sleeve through the air, releasing 3 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords that transformed into a trio of giant azure swords to form a protective barrier in front of him. Before he had a chance to do anything else, the draconic tail struck the giant swords with an earth-shattering boom, and the 3 swords shuddered violently before they were flying in 3 different directions. However, thankfully, they had managed to defend Han Li from the attack. In the meantime, Han Li hurriedly made a hand seal, and the flying carriage shot back in retreat as he made a beckoning motion to summon his azure bamboo cloud swarm swords back to himself. This black worm was even more formidable than that giant sand beast. After sending Han Li flying with a swipe of its claws, the black worm paid no further heed to him and swooped down to make a grab for the golden lotus flower. Han Li's pupils contracted slightly upon seeing this. He could tell that the black worm possessed incredible power, but the golden lotus flower was an extremely rare and precious spirit plant, so he was naturally unwilling to pass it up without a fight. With that in mind, he swept a sleeve through the air to stow the green jade flying carriage away, then flew directly toward the golden lotus flower as a streak of golden light. However, he wasn't able to get very far before the ground up ahead began to tremble violently, as if an earthquake were taking place, and he instantly stopped cold in his tracks before darting back in retreat at an even faster speed. Immediately thereafter, the ground up ahead split apart explosively, and an incredibly thick black appendage shot out from underground before sweeping toward the black worm. The black appendage was releasing a burst of tremendous force that swept up a gust of ferocious wind, and even though Han Li was already several thousand feet away, he was still sent flying back involuntarily like a fallen leaf in a storm. His entire body was dealt an incredibly heavy blow, and he felt as if he were about to fall apart at the seams. If it weren't for his fast reactions and his incredible physical prowess, he would have already been reduced to a pile of mincemeat. After steadying himself close to 10 kilometers away, he cast his gaze forward to discover that the black appendage was a gargantuan black tentacle that was over 10,000 feet thick. It was riddled with countless giant suction cups, and at this moment, the tentacle was wrapped around the black worm, which was made to resemble a tiny chick that had been caught in the talons of an eagle. It was roaring and struggling with all its might, but its efforts to free itself were completely futile. Several more resounding booms rang out in succession, and a few more identical black tentacles erupted out of the nearby ground before also wrapping themselves around the black worm, while Han Li looked on in astonishment. There had been no warning signs at all prior to the emergence of these black tentacles, and he wasn't able to detect them even with his tremendous spiritual sense. The entire swamp began to tremble and sway as an enormous black figure slowly rose up from the ground behind Han Li. It was an unimaginably massive creature with a lizard-like upper body. It had a long and thin neck and a bright red crown of flesh on its head that resembled the comb of a rooster. However, its lower body resembled that of an octopus, consisting of around a dozen giant tentacles. The mountainous creature was several dozen times larger than the black worm, and its enormous body obscured the entire sky. Its gargantuan tentacles were flailing violently as they delivered the black worm into its mouth, making it resemble a large worm in the beak of a rooster. An unfathomably powerful aura was emanating from the creature's body, and Han Li's face had turned deathly pale as a sense of horror welled up in his heart for the first time in a very long time. He immediately turned around and summoned his mantra-treasured axis, then unleashed his reversal true axis ability to flee the scene as quickly as he could. The creature's bright red eyes immediately settled on him, following which a black tentacle shot forth like lightning. Han Li was already several dozen kilometers away from the gargantuan creature, but its tentacle was able to catch up to him in the blink of an eye before wrapping itself around him. Wrapped within the black tentacle, a burst of tremendous force was constricting around Han Li from all directions, causing all of the bones in his body to creak and groan. He gave a muffled groan as he reversed the direction of revolution of his mantra-treasured axis, so that it was revolving conventionally again. Countless golden ripples emerged before spreading outward in all directions, instantly encompassing the surrounding area in a radius of over 10,000 feet, enveloping part of the black tentacle as well. The part of the tentacle that was enshrouded within the golden ripples was instantly immobilized, and the black creature let loose a low roar as it tugged its tentacle back with tremendous force. The golden ripples shuddered violently, looking as if they were about to fall apart at any moment. Right at this moment, a burst of golden lightning flashed past, and all of the golden ripples vanished in a flash. As a result, the black tentacle was freed, and it flew back to the gargantuan creature, which unfurled its tentacles, only to discover with a surprised expression that Han Li was already nowhere to be seen. Meanwhile, Han Li appeared out of thin air thousands of kilometers away amid a flash of golden lightning. His face was deathly pale. There was blood trickling down from the corner of his lips, and one of his arms had been twisted to a grotesque angle. He paid no heed to his own injuries as a burst of dazzling golden lightning erupted out of his body to form another lightning teleportation formation, immediately following which he vanished from the spot once again. In the sky above a lush forest, a golden lightning formation quickly took shape, and Han Li appeared at the center of the formation, then scoured his surroundings momentarily before heaving a long sigh of relief. Immediately thereafter, Jin Tong and the Pixiu appeared beside him, and the former's face was also pale from fright as she exclaimed, "What was that thing, uncle? I was so scared." The Pixiu was also looking quite shell-shocked. At this point, Han Li had regained some of his composure, and he replied, "I'm not sure. It must have been some kind of primordial true spirit." "Are primordial true spirits that scary? I thought they would all only be similar to that big sand beast," Jin Tong said with a hint of lingering fear in her eyes. She then turned to the Pixiu with an enraged expression as she accused, "Zio Bai, weren't you born in the primordial land? How could you lead us into such a dangerous place? Were you trying to get us killed?" "I was born in the primordial land, but I was taken away by primordial hunters not long after I was born, so I don't know much about this place at all. On top of that, I've already signed a contract with Master, and if he dies, I'll be in a terrible position as well, so there's no way I would have willingly led us into danger like that," the Pixiu hurriedly argued. This made sense to Jin Tong, and she gave a cold harumph before dropping the subject. "Looks like we've underestimated the primordial land," Han Li murmured to himself. They hadn't encountered any significant peril during this journey through the primordial land thus far, and as a result, he had become a little complacent, which had almost cost him his life. He quickly swallowed a recovery pill to heal his broken arm, then cast his gaze toward the primordial landscape up ahead with furrowed brows. It hadn't been long since they entered the primordial land, yet they had already encountered such a fearsome creature, and there was no telling what other perils laid up ahead. "What do we do now, Uncle?" Jin Tong asked. Han Li made a hand seal to conjure up a projection of a map in midair, one that depicted the areas that they had previously passed through, as well as areas that appeared repeatedly in the maps that he had previously purchased. This was a map that he had put together by referencing the map given to him by Worm 3, and the ones that he had purchased from Primordial Origin City. "Let's go here," Han Li decided as he pointed at a hilly region on the map. "Bright Deer Hill," Jin Tong read aloud as she looked at the spot on the map that Han Li was pointing at. According to the map, Bright Deer Hill isn't too far away from here, and there aren't any large primordial tribes residing in the area. "So let's go and rest there for a while before we make a decision on where to go next," Han Li said. He then swept a hand through the air to erase the projected map, following which the green jade flying carriage set off into the distance at a low altitude. In the wake of that close call, Han Li knew that he had to be more wary of the primordial land, and he activated all of the flying carriage's protective restrictions, even though doing so was quite costly in terms of immortal origin stones. On top of that, he didn't search for any more treasures, and after flying uneventfully for about half a month, they finally arrived on the edge of Bright Deer Hill. The dense vegetation on the ground below was gradually becoming sparser here, and even though it was already late at night, Han Li could still see some ferocious beasts prowling through the forest for food or engaged in battle with one another down below. Some of the more sensitive creatures were able to detect the flying carriage, and they immediately roared up at the heavens to establish their dominance. Han Li cast his gaze into the distance, and a perplexed look suddenly appeared on his face. He could sense bursts of powerful spiritual chi fluctuations surging through the air several hundred kilometers up ahead, and it seemed that there were many people locked in battle there. After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to stow his flying carriage away, then put on his Dragon 5 mask, using which he disguised himself as an unremarkable-looking middle-aged man. At the same time, he completely concealed his own aura before flying toward the battlefield up ahead in a stealthy fashion. As he flew through the air, the spiritual chi fluctuations up ahead became stronger and stronger, and upon reaching within 25 kilometers of the battlefield, Han Li descended into sparse forest down below before advancing through the forest on foot. Before long, he arrived in front of a spacious clearing where an elevated bonfire stand was situated. There was a bright bonfire lit on the stand, illuminating the entire surrounding area, while two groups of strange-looking foreign beings were locked in a fierce battle. One of the camps of foreign beings were humanoid in appearance, but they were very tall and wiry with extremely long necks. Each of them was standing at around 10 feet tall, and their bodies were dark green in color. Furthermore, there were pairs of long white tusks protruding out of their mouths before curling away to the side. In contrast, their opponents were far more horrific in appearance. These creatures were only around 5 feet tall, but they possessed extremely wide and bloated bodies that were gray in color and covered in thick slabs of armor like exoskeletons. They had virtually no necks, with nothing separating their chins and chests, and their lips were wide and thick, giving them the appearance of giant bipedal toads. Han Li observed the unfolding battle with a contemplative look in his eyes. Each side only had several dozen people, but they were displaying some rather interesting modes of attack. Among the humanoid creatures, some of them were holding short flutes crafted from some type of unknown material. Some were holding small drums crafted from beast bones and beast hide, while others were holding copper bells, and they were playing these instruments to release bursts of sound waves. Under the influence of these sound waves, hundreds of demon beasts of different description were rushing toward the opposing toad-like creatures like puppets on strings. As for the toad-like creatures, they were exposing their bellies, and it sounded as if there were someone pounding their bellies from inside their bodies, producing a peculiar sound that sent various types of spirit insects flying through the air or rushing out of the ground to swarm toward the opposing humanoid creatures. Among these spirit insects were golden praying mantises the size of cows and horses, as well as some that were as tiny as bees. Individually, none of them were all that formidable, but under the influence of the toad-like creatures, their auras were combined as one, allowing them to match up against their opponents on equal terms. Among the demon beasts, some had thick exoskeletons, some possessed enormous bodies, some were able to blast forth flames and lightning, and some were extremely fast, but they were unable to keep the spirit insects at bay and were constantly being forced back further and further into retreat. The humanoid creatures could see that the situation was unfolding against their favor, and one of them, a man with the longest neck, wearing a necklace crafted out of beast bones, let loose a loud roar. All of the sounds that were controlling the demon beasts and the spirit insects instantly subsided, and as a result, a temporary truce ensued. The man then opened his mouth to say something that was completely unintelligible to Han Li. "Can you understand what they're saying?" Han Li asked through his spiritual connection between himself and the Jade Pixiu. He's speaking in the universal language used by the primordial tribes, and he's talking to a person called Turiv, asking him why they were so insistent on hunting down their long-necked tribe, even though they had already abandoned the forest that they had been residing in for generations to flee all the way here, the Pixiu translated. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he cast his gaze toward the toad-like beings. One of the toad-like creatures that was wearing a layer of azure leather armor around its waist stepped forward, then said something in response in a loud and resonant voice. He says, "Don't be naive, Taj. Our gray toad tribe and your long-neck tribe have always been sworn enemies. Now that your long-neck tribe has fallen from grace, of course we have to hunt you down and eradicate all of you," Ziobai translated without even being prompted by Han Li. "How dare you? Are you trying to instigate a war between our beast race and your insect race? Are you not afraid of repeating the same horrific tragedy from millions of years ago? If you spark a war between our two races, our beast race will be sure to wipe out all of you once and for all," Todd replied in a furious voice. "I know that you've led us here as a distraction to try and divert us away, while your father led the majority of your tribesmen to the Peacock Spirit Tribe over at the Peacock River, but I can tell you now that your efforts are completely futile. Even the Tower Elephant Tribe and the Dark Hog Tribe have already been conquered by our insect race, let alone the Peacock Spirit Tribe." Turiv chortled as he slapped his own belly with his large hands. Taj's expression instantly changed drastically upon hearing this. "What did you say? That's impossible. In the face of the inspect spirits that we revere, the true spirits that you worship are nothing more than a bunch of toothless dogs. Our insect race has been plotting its revenge for the past several million years, and it's finally time for your beast race to face the flames of our wrath." Turiv continued as a fervent look appeared in his eyes. After hearing Zio-Bai's translation, Han Li concluded, "Looks like this is a conflict between two primordial tribes that has nothing to do with us." He then turned to depart, but right at this moment, the golden ring on his finger transformed into Jin Tong, who landed by his side, and her cheeks were slightly flushed with apprehension as she said, "Don't leave just yet, uncle. I'm getting a very strange feeling." "Could it be that you've been affected by the insect manipulation techniques used by those creatures?" "Surely not. Even their leader is only a true immortal. How could they possibly have affected you?" Han Li mused with a perplexed expression. I don't know, I just feel really strange, Jin Tong stuttered. As soon as her voice trailed off, a pair of golden praying mantises suddenly pounced at Han Li and Jin Tong from either flank, before lashing out with their scythe-like appendages. Han Li immediately swept a sleeve through the air upon seeing this, releasing two azure bamboo cloudswarm swords that shot forth toward the pair of oncoming praying mantises, slicing them in half in the blink of an eye. Immediately thereafter, a swarm of black beetles converged from all directions to surround Han Li and Jin Tong, and some of the gray toad beings also began to make their way toward Han Li's duo. Seeing as they had already been exposed, Han Li emerged into the clearing with Jin Tong. Reeve took a glance at Han Li and Jin Tong, and his expression changed drastically as he began to speak again, and furious looks instantly appeared on the faces of the long-neck beings upon hearing what he had to say. "What are they saying?" Han Li asked through voice transmission. Reeve is accusing the long-neck tribe of falling into depravity and colluding with humans. He says that it's no wonder that even the true spirits that they worship aren't able to protect them, and the long-neck beings are very angry to hear this, the Jade Pixiu replied. "It sounds like humans aren't very popular around these parts," Han Li mused with a wry smile. "Humans aren't the only ones that are denounced here. Any beings of any race who come from the immortal regions have always come to the primordial land solely to plunder and steal and—" The Jade Pixiu's voice trailed off here. Indeed, the title of primordial hunter sounded quite prestigious, but they were nothing more than opportunistic gatherers and bandits. "Tell them that we're just passing through, and that we have no intention of getting involved in their conflict," Han Li said as he swept a sleeve through the air, and the jade pendant hanging from his waist flew through the air before transforming into a jade pixiu that was around 10 feet in length. Xiao Bai took a glance at Han Li, then turned to the two groups of primordial beings as it relayed Han Li's message to them. Reeve took a glance at Xiao Bai, then turned his gaze to Jin Tong before finally turning his attention to Han Li, following which it declared in the language of the northern glacial immortal region. "I would have been willing to let you go, but you just killed two of our spirit insects. How do you plan to compensate for that?" "What compensation do you want from me?" Han Li asked as he raised an eyebrow. "Leave that little girl behind and I'll let you go," Reeve declared as he pointed a finger at Jin Tong. Han Li couldn't help but heave a forlorn internal sigh upon hearing this. He knew that a peaceful resolution was out of the question now. Sure enough, before he had a chance to say anything, Jin Tong had already stepped forward with an enraged expression as she began rolling up her sleeves. "You want me to stay, do you?" she asked in a cold voice as her aura began to swell rapidly. Reeve was very alarmed to sense her rapidly elevating aura, and all of the black beetles around Jin Tong instantly began to rush back in retreat out of an instinctive sense of fear. Reeve took a few steps backward before hurriedly urging all of his tribesmen to spring into action, and the other gray-toed beings immediately began to produce the same croaking sound from before with their bloated bellies. A small portion of the spirit insects that they had summoned were still surrounding the long-neck beings, but the rest were all swarming toward Jin Tong. "Go and help her," Han Lin instructed with slightly furrowed brows. Xiao Bai immediately did as it was told, swelling drastically in size as it let loose a loud roar before pouncing at the swarm of spirit insects. The dense swarm of black beetles inundated Xiao Bai in an instant, but a layer of bright white light had emerged over its body to keep all of the black beetles at bay. At the same time, it opened its mouth to release a burst of tremendous suction force, which sucked in all of the surrounding black beetles in a frenzy. Meanwhile, Taj and the other long-neck beings were discussing how to proceed, yet all of them had fallen silent and were staring at Xiao Bai with stunned looks on their faces. At the same time, Jin Tong had transformed into a giant golden beetle that was slashing its front legs through the air in rapid succession, releasing streaks of translucent golden light that swept forth in all directions, shredding all of the spirit insects in their path. Thierry was horrified to see this. In the blink of an eye, his army of spirit insects was on the verge of complete eradication. In contrast, Taj was ecstatic to see this, and he hurriedly began yelling something in the primordial language. The long-neck beings were instantly reinvigorated, and they began playing their instruments again, spurring on their demon beasts to attack the surrounding swarm of spirit insects. The previously orderly ranks of the gray-toed beings were instantly thrown into complete disarray by Jin Tong and Xiao Bai, and Thierry was frantically instructing his spirit insects to unleash a final wave of attacks while simultaneously instructing his own tribesmen to retreat. Han Li couldn't understand what Thierry was seeing, but he was immediately able to see through his intentions, and he swept a sleeve through the air, releasing several thousand dark yellow beings that transformed into Dao warriors before rushing into the swarm of insects. Meanwhile, Jin Tong flew out of the swarm of insects as a streak of golden light before arriving in front of the gray-toed beings in a flash, then lashed out with her front legs to send a flurry faux streaks of translucent golden light sweeping through the air, instantly killing most of the gray-toed beings. Thierry could see that escape wasn't going to be possible, and he immediately fell to his knees as he pleaded, "Please spare us. Why are you killing us when you're a member of the insect race yourself? All of us gray-toed beings are insect envoys. We are loyal servants of the revered insect spirits. I only asked him to leave you behind so that we could take you back to our insect race and save you from having to serve as that human's pet." Jin Tong ceased in her attacks upon hearing this, and she reverted back to her human form before returning to Han Li's side, then asked, "What is this insect spirit that you speak of?" I'm afraid I don't know. Our gray-toed tribe is nothing more than a tiny branch of the insect race. Even though I'm the chief of the tribe, I've only ever heard of the revered insect spirit and never actually had the honor of meeting them," Thierry replied in a hesitant voice. Jin Tong turned to Han Li upon hearing this, then asked, "Can we use a soul search technique on him, uncle?" "Sure," Han Li replied with a nod, then pointed a finger forward, upon which a thread of translucent light flew into Thierry's glabella. "No," Thierry wailed with a horrified expression, only for his head to explode violently just an instant later. "That's quite a nasty restriction," Han Li remarked as his brows furrowed slightly. The remaining gray-toed beings were furious to see the demise of their chief, and they began charging at Han Li once again. Several seconds later, the entire clearing fell completely silent, and all of the gray-toed beings had been eradicated. After stowing his Dao warriors away, Han Li turned to the long-neck beings, who were clearly apprehensive of him, but didn't dare to leave without permission. All of the long-neck beings were also looking back at Han Li with a mixture of fear and confusion in their eyes, and it was clear that they didn't know how to react to what had just happened. The man by the name of Taj hesitated momentarily, then voluntarily approached Han Li before extending a grateful salute as he said in the language of the northern glacial Immortal region, "Thank you for saving us, Senior. Seeing as you can understand my language, I'm sure you're already aware that I didn't kill those gray-toed beings to save you and your tribesmen," Han Li said as he took a glance at Taj. "In any case, you've saved all of us by killing those gray-toed beings, and that is a great kindness that we must repay. However, at the moment, our tribe has been severely ravaged by the insect race, so I'm afraid we're in no position to be holding a reception. Otherwise, we would be sure to invite you to our tribe as an esteemed guest," Taj replied in an apologetic manner. Han Li wanted to dismiss the long-neck beings, but after taking a glance at Jin Tong, he decided to raise some questions instead. What's going on with the beast race and the insect race? A hesitant look appeared on Taj's face, and only after a brief pause did he reply, "The insect race and our beast race have different beliefs, and as a result, we've become sworn enemies. We've been fighting relentlessly against each other over the years, and many large-scale wars have taken place between our two races." "What are these differing beliefs of yours?" Hanley asked. "Our beast race is split up into many different tribes, and all of us worship different true spirit holy beasts. We don't always see eye to eye, but all of us revere true spirits, while all of the tribes of the insect race worship different insect spirits," Taj explained. "I see. That's all I have to ask. You can go now," Hanley said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Thank you, Senior," Taj hurriedly replied with a respectful bow, then began making his way back to his tribesmen. "Let's go," Hanley said as he turned to Jin Tong and Zio Bai, the latter of which reverted back into a jade pendant before flying back to Hanley's waist. Meanwhile, Jin Tong was looking a little hesitant, and Hanley knew that this had to have something to do with those gray-toed beings, so he didn't try to rush her. Right at this moment, Taj made his way back to Hanley, then extended another respectful salute as he said, "After careful consideration, I feel that it's necessary to invite you to travel to the Peacock Spirit Tribe with us so we can show you some hospitality and repay you for your kindness. If you really want to display your sincerity, then get your true leader to come out and see me," Hanley said in an indifferent voice. A surprised look appeared on Taj's face upon hearing this. Immediately thereafter, the group of long-neck beings parted to open up a path, following which a figure dressed in a large gray cloak with a gray cloth concealing their facial features emerged. "Young Mistress Yiffen, you can't." Taj hurriedly tried to stop them, but the cloaked figure paid no heed to him as they made their way over to Hanley, then crossed their arms of their chest before extending a salute to him. After that, they removed the gray cloth that was concealing their face to reveal an extremely intricate set of facial features that were virtually no different from those of a human. The only difference was that their skin was light blue and their ears tapered to sharp points, while a pair of sharp fangs were protruding out from behind their lips. "You're not a long-neck being?" Hanley asked with a surprised expression. Earlier, he had noticed that Taj seemed to have been acting under the instructions of someone else, and he had thought that perhaps the chief of the long-neck tribe was among them, but that didn't appear to be the case. "I am Niu Yiffen, the daughter of the Calm Dawn tribe, and I was sent here to unite all of the tribe of the beast race to put up a collective resistance against the insect race. But as soon as I arrived at the long-neck tribe, we were attacked by the gray-toed tribe and several other tribes, and we fled all the way here. It's only thanks to your timely intervention that we were able to survive, Senior," the blue-skinned woman said. "Seeing as you're the one calling the shots here, I presume it's you who's inviting me to the Peacock Spirit Tribe," Hanley asked. "That's right. You must be a primordial hunter, right, Senior? The insect race has recently become more and more aggressive. Not only are they attacking our beast race, I've heard that they instructed the sand beasts to attack a ship not long ago. If you're not familiar with this area, then you could easily stumble into their territory, and even with your unfathomable powers, a grueling battle would be inevitable," Niu Yiffen said. "So you're extending this invitation to me for my sake?" Hanley asked as he raised an eyebrow. "I wish to repay you for saving all of us, but of course, my motives aren't entirely unselfish. I'm hoping that you can protect us on the way back to the Calm Dawn tribe," Niu Yiffen replied in a candid fashion. "Would your tribe happen to have a map of the primordial land?" Hanley asked. "The primordial land is an enormous place, and many areas are ruled over by different powerful beings and tribes, making them inaccessible to others. Hence, even our Calm Dawn tribe only has a map of some areas occupied by our beast race. As long as you're willing to escort us back to our Calm Dawn tribe, I'll do my best to collect all of the maps in the possession of the nearby tribes, Niu Yifan promised. Han Li considered the offer for a moment, then decided to agree. A hint of elation immediately flashed through Niu Yifan's eyes as she said, "Thank you, Senior. May I ask your name?" "My name is Li Feiyu," Han Li replied. As Taj brought Han Li and Jin Tong back to the rest of the group, the other long-neck beings all began to watch Han Li's duo with clear apprehension and fear in their eyes. Taj said something to everyone in the primordial tongue, and only then did all of the long-neck beings look away from Han Li and Jin Tong before commencing the process of cleaning up the battlefield. At the same time, some of them began to collect the carcasses of the gray-toed beings and the spirit insects, clearly finding them to be useful as materials. Shortly thereafter, one of the long-neck beings exchanged a glance with Niu Yifan, following which the former carried a storage ring that was crafted out of bone and laden with materials to Han Li. Han Li wasn't particularly interested in these materials, but he still accepted the storage ring. After all, if he were to refuse, then that would most likely only make the long-neck beings even more uneasy, as they could develop the false impression that he was harboring certain ulterior motives. However, after accepting the storage ring, he immediately assigned its contents to Xiao Bai and Jin Tong for them to split and devour as they pleased. Shortly thereafter, the entire group of long-neck beings set off once again, this time toward the south. Taj was leading the way from the forefront, while Han Li and Niu Yifan were walking alongside one another at the center of the unit, surrounded by all of the other long-neck beings. As for Jin Tong and Xiao Bai, they had already turned back into a pair of accessories that were fitted around Han Li's finger and hanging from his waist, respectively. Once we pass over this hilly region, we'll enter an area where a hundred-eyed centipede is active. The centipede is extremely formidable and aggressive, and it's been known to attack anything flying overhead. Hence, we'll only be able to take flight on demon beast steeds once we've passed through that area, Niu Yifan explained. That's fine. The primordial land is a very dangerous place, so it makes sense to take some safety precautions, Han Li replied in an indifferent voice. At this point, they were already deep in the primordial land, so he naturally had no interest in taking any risks unless it was absolutely necessary to do so. As he continued to walk along, Han Li declared through voice transmission, "Xiao Bai, I want you to teach me the primordial language." Xiao Bai was very much taken aback to hear this, and it exclaimed, "The cultivators of the immortal regions have always regarded the primordial language as a lowly language that's completely beneath them. Are you sure you want to learn it, Master?" "Languages are but tools for communication, so I don't perceive any languages to be above or below others," Han Li replied. "All right, if you want to learn, then I'll teach you," Xiao Bai replied. Over a month flew by in the blink of an eye. In the sky above a lush, primordial forest, giant flying creatures of different descriptions were soaring through the air, carrying long-necked beings on their backs as they descended toward the center of the forest. There was an unremarkable-looking male human among these long-necked beings, standing out like a sore thumb, and it was none other than Han Li. Taj was straddled atop a winged black deer while flying alongside Niu Yifan, who was riding a white snow eagle, and they were on a diagonal descent toward a clearing at the center of the forest. As for Han Li, he was riding a gray mammoth with a pair of ears that were as large as wings, and he was also descending out of the sky a little behind the long-necked beings. After landing on the ground, Han Li inspected his surroundings briefly to find that there were some dome-shaped buildings concealed within the foliage, blending into the surrounding environment in a harmonious fashion. However, most of these buildings had already been damaged. Some were half-collapsed, while others had been completely razed to the ground, and a series of lifeless bodies were littered around the buildings. Most of these bodies belong to a type of short and petite gray-skinned creature with large heads and facial features that were very similar to those of humans, except their eyes, noses, and mouths were all squished together, presenting a rather peculiar sight to behold. Additionally, there were also many bodies belonging to long-necked beings and demon beast carcasses strewn around the area, most of which had been horribly disfigured by spirit insect bites. After conducting a brief search through the area, the expressions of all of the long-necked beings had darkened significantly, and all of them were clearly infuriated by what they had seen. Shortly thereafter, Han Li saw Taj carrying the body of an elderly long-necked being out of one of the semi-collapsed buildings, and there was a grief-stricken look on his face. The body's facial features bore a strong resemblance to Taj, and this observation made it apparent to Han Li that this was most likely Taj's father and the chief of the long-necked tribe. Niu Yifan made her way over to Taj, then crossed her arms in front of her chest and extended a deep bow toward the lifeless body in Taj's arms. After that, she patted Taj on the shoulder and said something to him in the primordial language. Having already learned some of the primordial language from Xiao Bai on the way here, Han Li was able to discern that she was offering him some condolences. Taj took some time to compose himself, then fished a long length of black bone that was as smooth as jade out of his father's pocket. He raised the bone up high as he let loose a cry of grief, and all of the other long-necked beings immediately gathered around him while echoing the same sound. Meanwhile, Niu Yifan made her way over to Han Li's side as she explained in a slight weary voice. Taj's father died in battle, and he's about to become the new chief of the tribe. It looks like your beast race isn't in a very good place right now, Han Li remarked. Ever since we defeated the insect race during that war several million years ago, all of our tribes have been far too complacent. We've always been keeping close tabs on the insect race's activities, but they've been planning these attacks for a very long time, and they struck without any warning, so we were caught completely off guard. Having said that, the king of the true spirits that we worship are definitely far more powerful than their insect spirits. So once all of our tribes unite to summon our king, the complete eradication of the insect race will be imminent, Niu Yifan replied in a determined voice. Han Li wasn't very interested in hearing about these matters, and he said, I suppose I can only wish you the best of luck. How long left until we reach your Calm Dawn tribe? At our current speed, we'll be able to return to our Calm Dawn tribe in 3 more months at most, Niu Yifan replied. Han Li nodded in response and didn't say anything further. The long-necked beings held a simple ceremony to grieve the dead, then packed up the bodies of all of their fellow tribesmen and the peacock spirit beings before setting off once again. After leaving the settlement of the peacock spirit tribe, everyone clearly sped up significantly, perhaps because they were out of the territory under the complete control of the beast race. Aside from several occasions where they had to slow down to avoid some particularly powerful primordial beasts, the rest of the time was spent traveling at full speed. During this time, Han Li continued to learn the primordial language from Xiao Bai, while keeping tabs on the area that they had passed through so that he could incorporate them into the map that he was compiling. At this point, the maps that he had purchased from Primordial Origin City early were largely useless. The map given to him by Worm 3 was still somewhat useful, but it had no overlap with the route that he was currently taking, so he could only use it to ascertain his approximate location. 2.5 months later, Han Li and the long-necked beings finally made it out of the vast forest. The long-necked beings were very familiar with this forest, so they were able to preemptively avoid many of the powerful true spirits residing in the area, but they were still intercepted by a few ambush attacks from enemy insect race beings. Han Li had refrained from getting involved in those battles, leaving Jin Tong and Xiao Bai to do the fighting for him. Over time, the animosity and wariness that the long-neck beings harbored toward Han Li gradually faded, and Han Li was able to learn more about the primordial land from Nuo, Yifan, and Taj. At this moment, they had arrived in front of an enormous canyon. This was the Dark Star Canyon, where the Calm Dawn tribe resided. Even though Han Li had already been made aware that the Calm Dawn tribe was one of the most powerful tribes of the beast race, he was still astonished by the sight laid out before him. Ahead of him was a majestic mountain range that stretched as far as the eyes could see, and there were countless acres of lush vegetation separated by a gargantuan white rift, much like a gash on the body of a giant beast. At the entrance of the White Canyon stood an enormous white stone pass, which was riddled with watchtowers and flags, giving it the appearance of a massive white fortress. The entire fortress was over 100,000 feet tall, virtually the same height as the two lips of the canyon, and there were three giant arch gates that were around 60,000 to 70,000 feet tall standing at the center of the fortress, in front of each of which was a black metal fence. A massive, turbulent river was flowing through the central arch gate, and the water in the river was a rather murky green color, churning along while producing a sound akin to that of rumbling thunder. Upon arriving at the fortress, Nuo Yifan removed the long gray cloak that she had been wearing the entire trip, revealing the luscious curves of her body, which were only accentuated by the light and tight-fitting clothes that she was wearing underneath the cloak. All of the male long-neck beings couldn't help but gawk at her for a moment before hurriedly looking away. As for Han Li, he was watching Nuo Yifan with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He didn't know what material the gray cloak was woven from, but it had completely concealed Nuo Yifan's aura, and only now did he realize that she was at the late true immortal stage. It seemed that even in the primordial land, there existed some tool refinement techniques, but he presumed that only a small number of powerful primordial tribes would be able to afford the services of these tool refinement masters. Right at this moment, several dozen figures flew out of the fortress, and all of them were rather similar to Nuo Yifan in appearance, with light blue skin and tapered ears, clearly indicating that they were also Calm Dawn beings. The majority of them were men, who were slightly taller than their female counterparts and had some dark patterns on their skin. However, they weren't physically imposing at all, and not only were they all quite handsome, there was a slightly effeminate appearance about them. Their leader was a middle-aged man holding an azure jade staff, and he bore a strong resemblance to Nuo Yifan, except the lines of his face were more angular and defined, and he was wearing a long off-white robe that gave him a scholarly appearance. "Yifan," the man called out, and an ecstatic look immediately appeared on Nuo Yifan's face upon catching sight of him. "Father." Meanwhile, the long-neck beings and Han Li were all hovering in the air some distance away. At this point, Han Li was able to understand the primordial language without much trouble, but he still had some trouble speaking the language due to lack of practice. "I'm sorry for putting you through such an ordeal, my precious daughter. I'm so glad that you've returned safe and sound," the middle-aged man said with a pained expression as he gently stroked Nuo Yifan's hair. "I wanted to go on this trip, so you're not to blame, father. It was a dangerous trip, but thankfully, we've managed to contact all of the northern tribes, and they've all decided to join forces with our Dark Star Canyon. I'm sure it won't be long before we unite the entire beast race in the war against the insect race," Nuo Yifan said. "You did very well, my daughter. Over the past half a month or so, some tribes have already arrived at our Dark Star Canyon. However, I heard from them that the Long-Neck tribe and the Peacock Spirit tribe were attacked. Were you affected by the attacks?" the middle-aged man asked. "While I was at the Long-Neck tribe, we were attacked by several enemy tribes, including the Gray Toad tribe and the Azure Scorpion tribe. but Chief Tak of the Longneck tribe was able to divert most of the enemy forces away by fleeing to the Peacock Spirit tribe, while the other Longneck beings and I fled to Bright Deer Hill. After that, the Gray Toad beings caught up to us, but thankfully, Senior Lee here intervened to save us and eradicate the Gray Toad beings. Nuo Yifen replied as she gestured to Han Li. A hint of lingering fear appeared in the middle-aged man's eyes upon hearing this, and he was feeling even more remorseful after hearing about his daughter's close call. Upon hearing that it was Han Li who had eradicated the Gray Toad beings, he cast his gaze toward his daughter's savior, upon which his pupils instantly contracted slightly. Not only was he very much taken aback to see that Han Li was a human, all of the other Calm Dawn beings displayed a similar reaction upon catching sight of him. Due to the fact that Calm Dawn beings were quite similar in appearance to humans, Han Li could clearly see the detest and wariness etched on their faces. Nuo Yifen could also see the animosity that everyone was displaying, and she immediately added, "It was only thanks to Senior Lee's protection that we were able to make it back here safely." The middle-aged man's expression eased slightly upon hearing this, and he flew toward Han Li with everyone else. "Thank you for saving Yifen and escorting her back to our Dark Star Canyon. If you want anything for compensation, feel free to state what you desire," the middle-aged man said in the language of the immortal regions as he cupped his fist in a salute toward Han Li. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon hearing this. It was clear that the chief of the Calm Dawn tribe intended to send him away with some treasures, as opposed to allowing him to enter the Dark Star Canyon. "There's no need to thank me. On the topic of compensation, I've already told your daughter what I want," Han Li replied in an expressionless manner. The white-robed man's brows furrowed with befuddlement, and he turned to her with an inquisitive expression, upon which Nuo Yifen relayed Han Li's request for maps of the primordial land to him through voice transmission. The white-robed man's brows furrowed even more tightly upon hearing this, and he turned back to Han Li as he said, "My apologies, fellow Taoist Li, but I'm afraid that my daughter has made a promise that she can't keep. Our Calm Dawn tribe is quite a large tribe, but it's still completely insignificant in the context of all of the beast race tribes, so we're not capable of gathering all of the maps of the different tribes. Hence, I'll have to ask you to state another condition. I know the rules of the human race, and I'll be sure to offer you satisfactory compensation. I'm not a primordial hunter, and I'm only asking for these maps as I wish to cross the primordial land en route to another immortal region. Hence, you can remove the locations of the tribes on the maps that you give me, and only mark out the more dangerous areas and places where formidable beasts reside," Han Li said. A contemplative look appeared on Nuo Kinglin's face upon hearing this, and he didn't immediately respond. Nuo Yifen approached him, and the two of them communicated a while longer through voice transmission, before the latter seemed to have finally arrived at a decision. Nuo Kinglin turned back to Han Li, but still found himself unable to ascertain Han Li's cultivation base. "In that case, I'll get you to stay in our Dark Star Canyon for a few days. The other tribes of the beast race will be gathering here over the next few days, and I'll be able to collect their maps once they arrive," he said. "I'll be in your care then," Han Li replied with a nod. While conversing with Nuo Kinglin, Han Li had been observing him the entire time as well, and he noticed that Nuo Kinglin seemed to have also concealed his own aura, and that he was most likely around the early golden immortal stage. However, given how these foreign beings were able to use demon beasts in battle, their true combat prowess most likely had to be overestimated by half a rank. As for the other Calm Dawn beings behind Nuo Kinglin, they were all somewhere between the mid-true immortal stage and the early golden immortal stage, with the majority of them at the true immortal stage. Nuo Kinglin gave Han Li a nod, then turned to Taj with a solemn expression as he said, Thank you for escorting Yiffin back to our Dark Star Canyon. Our Calm Dawn tribe will remember what you've done, and after the war is over, we'll be sure to do everything in our power to assist your tribe in rebuilding a home and making a resurgence. Thank you, Chief Nuo. Taj replied with a grateful expression as he crossed his arms over his chest and extended a slight bow. Prior to that, you and your tribesmen can treat our Dark Star Canyon as your own home, Nuo Kinglin continued. Taj and the other long-neck beings were even more grateful upon hearing this, and some of them had even burst into tears. After that, Nuo Kinglin led Han Li and the others over the giant fortress before flying into the canyon. As they flew over the fortress, Han Li could see that there was a giant lizard-like winged beast prowling behind each of the watchtowers on the fortress. Their scales were reflecting a black gleam, and they occasionally opened their eyes to look up at the sky. Han Li could clearly sense that all of their animosity was directed toward him. Only after passing over the fortress was the true scale of the Dark Star Canyon fully revealed to Han Li. There was a green river that was over 10,000 feet wide flowing through the center of the canyon, with the sound of rumbling thunder, and on either side of the river were sheer cliff faces that were as steep as they were majestic. On the sheer mountain faces at an even higher altitude were a series of hollowed-out caves of different shapes and sizes, all of which were interconnected by a system boardwalks that were embedded into the mountain faces to form an enormous and complex cluster of buildings. Furthermore, these weren't just some simple and crude caves. Instead, there were intricate engravings and well-crafted pillars and railings on the outside, and their openings were sealed with round or rectangular wooden doors of different styles that also had beautiful engravings on them. On top of that, these caves were surrounded by moss, vines, and flowers to give them an even more delightful appearance. If the Peacock Spirit Tribe settlement had been a small village in a forest, then the Dark Star Canyon, where the Calm Dawn tribe resided, would be the equivalent of a thriving human city. The Dark Star River within the canyon was a winding river that twisted and turned, and the deeper Han Li flew into the canyon, the more surprised he became. A series of giant altar-like buildings had begun to appear on the surrounding mountain faces, and they were giving off bursts of faint formation fluctuations. Han Li knew that he was a rather sensitive figure here, so he only casually glanced at the passing scenery instead of scrutinizing the layout of the entire canyon too closely, and he also refrained from using too much of his spiritual sense. Nuo Kinglin had been secretly observing Han Li this entire time, and a pleased look appeared on his face upon seeing this. As the group approached the center of the valley, everyone descended onto a cliff with relatively flat terrain. Nuo Kinglin turned to Han Li as he said, "This is quite a peaceful place. You can stay here for the next few days, fellow Taoist Li." Han Li inspected his surroundings to find that the cliff was surrounded by Calm Dawn tribe settlements, and they weren't overly close, but it was very convenient for them to conduct surveillance on this place or surround it on very short notice. "Thank you, Chief Nuo," he said with a smile, and Nuo Kinglin and the others promptly departed, flying deeper into the canyon. Nuo Yiffin hesitated momentarily, then decided to stay behind as she approached Han Li with an apologetic expression as she said, "Please don't misunderstand, fellow Taoist Li. Unfortunately, my tribesmen are still quite apprehensive of humans. I've always wanted to ask you this. Why is it that you aren't wary of humans like your tribesmen?" Han Li asked. "Truth be told, my deceased mother was a human, so I'm half human myself," Nuo Yiffin explained after a brief hesitation. Han Li nodded in response and didn't say anything further. After the two of them parted ways, Han Li inspected his surroundings briefly with his bright-sight spirit eyes, then descended onto the cliff and began to make his way toward the hollowed-out cave abode there. He opened the heavy stone doors of the cave abode, and his brows furrowed slightly at the state of the cave abode. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, clearly indicating that it hadn't been inhabited for a very long time. He swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a gentle breeze that swept out all of the dust in the cave abode. Immediately thereafter, a series of lamps on the walls lit up on their own, illuminating the entire stone chamber while also giving off a faint musky aroma. Han Li looked around to find that the cave wasn't very large, and it was split into two rooms that were only slightly larger than the average room. In the outer room was a stone table and a stone chair, while only a stone bed could be found in the inner room, presenting a set of extremely minimalistic furnishings. After closing the stone doors, Han Li pulled out a series of formation flags and formation plates before setting them up around the cave. Around an hour later, the formation was complete, and Han Li sat down onto the stone bed with his legs crossed before tapping the golden ring on his finger. The golden ring immediately took on Jin Tong's human form before landing beside Han Li, and he said, "Jin Tong, I'll be going into seclusion for a while to see if I can elevate my cultivation base a little. During this time, you and Xiao Bai will be tasked with protecting me." "Why are you suddenly going into seclusion at a time like this, uncle?" Jin Tong asked. "During our time in the primordial land, we've encountered many powerful primordial beasts. Even though we'll be staying in the Calm Dawn tribe for the near future, so we'll be a little safer than before, but we still have to prepare for the journey ahead. The Heavenly Court isn't going to stop coming after me, and the primordial land is far more perilous than I anticipated. Only by elevating my own powers as much as possible can we continue to survive here," Han Li replied. "All right, you can count on me, uncle. No one will be able to disturb your cultivation as long as I'm here," Jin Tong vowed with a determined expression. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he flipped a hand over to produce a storage pouch before handing it to Jin Tong. "Here's some food for you. Make sure to eat it sparingly." Jin Tong was ecstatic as she accepted the storage pouch from Han Li, then skipped her way to the outer room before sitting down onto the stone table with her legs crossed to inspect the contents of the storage pouch. "Don't forget about me." Xiao Bai immediately jumped down from Han Li's waist before rushing over to Jin Tong's side and cuddling up to her like an affectionate little dog, only to be slapped away by Jin Tong with a disdainful expression. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he withdrew his gaze before sweeping a sleeve through the air to activate the formation and temporarily cut off the inner room from the outside world. He then flipped a hand over to produce a pair of jade slips and an ancient yellow scripture, and these were none other than the 3 time attribute cultivation arts of the northern glacial immortal region, the water divination time arts, the mantra axis scripture, and the illusory dawn treasured scripture. He had already read through the entirety of the 3 cultivation arts, and he felt like there was some type of connection between the 3, but he had never gotten the chance to conduct a closer examination. Hence, he was planning to compare the 3 cultivation arts carefully here to see if he could glean some insights that could assist him in his cultivation. Among the 3 cultivation arts, the mantra axis scripture was naturally the most familiar one to Han Li. At this point, he had already obtained 6 levels of the cultivation art, and his progression in the cultivation art had been quite smooth thanks to the heaven-controlling vial. He hadn't begun using either of the other 2 cultivation arts yet, but given the foundation that he had already had, he was confident that he would be able to make fast progress in those 2 cultivation arts as well. After a brief moment of contemplation, he picked up the water divination time arts first and began to carefully read through it. Han Li pressed the jade slip that contained the water divination time arts to his own glabella, then closed his eyes and fell completely still. Initially, his brows were slightly furrowed in befuddlement, but they quickly unfurrowed again as if he had been struck by some enlightenment. However, shortly thereafter, his brows furrowed slightly once again before relaxing for a second time, and the cycle continued to repeat itself. As time passed, Han Li's brows became more and more tightly furrowed, and this time he remained stumped by the obstacle that he had encountered. Sweat was beginning to bead up on his forehead, and remained in the same seated positino for 3 days and 3 nights. Upon opening his eyes, his back was already completely drenched in sweat, while his eyes were severely bloodshot, giving him an exhausted appearance. How could this be? He murmured to himself as he removed the blue jade slip from his forehead. The water divination time arts consisted of 7 chapters, and during the initial phase of its cultivation, he had to manifest a treasure similar to the mantra treasured axis. This treasure was called the clear time vial, and it could derive time water droplets from absorbing the light of the sun and the moon. Upon reaching the 4th chapter of the cultivation art, one would be able to refine the time water droplets that they had collected in order to manifest threads of time. These threads of time weren't unfamiliar to Han Li. Even back in the spirit realm, he had seen these threads being produced by the Asura spiders. These were extraordinary threads that could only arise from the river of time, which contained time law powers, and they could extend the lifespans of mortals and low-grade cultivators, or delay the onset of heavenly tribulations for high-grade cultivators. From the description in the cultivation, the threads of time refined using the water divination time arts were supposed to contain a greater abundance of time law powers, thereby making them even more potent, and they could even delay the onset of the 3 decays for true immortals. However, as was the case with the mantra treasured axis, an item that contained time law powers was required to refine the clear time vial. Additionally, many other precious natural treasures were also required, thereby posing a very steep barrier of entry for this cultivation art, and this was presumably why so many vast flow palace cultivators had ultimately refrained from pursuing this cultivation art. Unlike the mantra axis scripture, this cultivation art didn't allow one to open immortal acupoints as they progressed. Instead, the improvement in one's cultivation base more so hinged upon the rate at which they were able to manifest time water droplets. Apparently, once one accumulated sufficient time water droplets to form a river, they would be able to unleash even more unfathomable abilities. However, these time water droplets took a very long time to manifest, and in the initial phase of one's cultivation, it would take centuries to accumulate even a single time water droplet, so it was unclear how much time it would take to accumulate an entire river's worth. From what he had read, Han Li determined that the water divination time arts was slightly inferior to the mantra axis scripture, but it had its own unique advantages as well. At this point, he had only read through the cultivation art several times, and he hadn't begun cultivating it at all, so his understanding of it was naturally still rather limited. He took a deep breath to suppress the befuddlement in his heart, then began to read through the illusory, dawn-treasured scripture. The inner room was completely silent with the exception of the sound of rustling pages, and over a day passed by in a flash before Han Li closed the book. He massaged his sore glabella momentarily, but at the same time, a faint smile had appeared on his face. The illusory dawn-treasured scripture was even more unique than the other 2 time attribute cultivation arts. As opposed to a cultivation art, it was more accurate to call it a tool refinement scripture. The reason why Han Li thought this was because, upon reaching a certain stage in the cultivation art, one would be able to break down certain items that contain time law powers to derive something called illusory dawn sand. After refining this illusory dawn sand using a special technique, one would be able to create a small closed-off space known as an illusory dawn sand domain using these grains of sand, and that could come in any form, such as an illusory dawn sand box, an illusory dawn sand vial, etc. Inside the space within these vessels, the rate at which time flowed could be altered. All of a sudden, a thought occurred to Han Li. If I had a sufficient amount of illusory dawn sand, would I be able to? However, a self-deprecating look then appeared on his face. Setting aside whether that's even possible, how am I supposed to obtain so much illusory dawn sand? Items that contain time law powers aren't so easy to find. With that in mind, he turned his gaze back to the three cultivation arts as a contemplative look appeared on his face. All three of them were time attribute cultivation arts, but they focused on different things, and aside from the mantra axis scripture, which could be used as a cultivation art, the other two were more related to treasures that contained time law powers. After closely examining all three cultivation arts, Han Li became even more convinced that some type of connection existed between them. Of course, there were bound to be some similarities, considering all three were time attribute cultivation arts, but Han Li felt like the connection wasn't as simple as that. But at the same time, he couldn't put his finger on exactly what the connection was. Around half a month flew by in a flash. Inside the inner room of the cave, Han Li was standing while holding the three cultivation arts in his hands with a wry smile on his face. Even after extensive examination and pondering, he was still no closer to a definitive answer. I should take a break. If I keep forcing myself deeper into this hole, I'm going to end up hampering my future cultivation, he sighed to himself, then stowed the three cultivation arts away. The laws of time was one of the three paramount laws, so its cultivation arts were bound to be different from the average cultivation art, and Han Li decided that he wasn't going to pursue the other two cultivation arts before he figured out exactly what type of connection existed between the three. Of course, another important factor behind this decision was that he didn't have the time to go into seclusion for an extended period. With that in mind, he sat back down with his legs crossed, then flipped a hand over to produce a white jade vial, and he tipped out a pill that was as translucent as jade from within before swallowing it. The pill was called a Snow Soul Pill, and it was one of the golden Immortal stage pills that he had obtained from Xia O Jinhen, so it was perfect for him to consume. After swallowing the pill, Han Li closed his eyes to meditate, and once his heart had settled into a calm and tranquil state, he pressed a white jade slip to his own glabella. This jade slip contained the fifth level of the mantra axis scripture. Layers of golden ripples spread in all directions from the jade slip, basking Han Li in a soft, golden glow. In contrast with how difficult the fourth level of the cultivation art had been to understand, the fifth level felt more straightforward to Han Li, and after memorizing its contents, he stowed it away again. After that, he placed one hand over the other in front of himself to make a hand seal, and his mantra treasured axis appeared before him. The formation in the room concealed the energy fluctuations of the mantra treasured axis, but Jin Tong and Xiao Bai were still able to detect something through their spiritual connection with Han Li, and both of them turned to face the inner room. The time Tao runes on the mantra treasured axis lit up as a string of radiant miniature suns, and over 3 months quickly passed by in seclusion. During this time, the Dark Star Canyon had become quite lively. Aside from the other large tribes that ranked alongside the Calm Dawn tribe, close to half of the smaller beast race tribes had also traveled to the Dark Star Canyon. As a result, things became very busy for the Calm Dawn tribe. Nuo Yifen paid Han Li 2 visits in the first month, but on both occasions, so he was told that Han Li was in seclusion, and she hadn't returned since. It seemed that everyone had forgotten that there was still a human residing in the canyon. On this day, Both Jin Tong and Xiao Bai were staring at the light barrier that separated the room that Han Li was in from the outside world, and their eyes were wide with intrigue. About an hour ago, Han Li had eaten a small round fruit that was riddled with tiny golden spots, and his mantra-treasured axis had immediately become brighter as a result. At the same time, a tiny golden vortex had appeared on the outside of his thigh, and a vast expanse of golden light had begun surging toward the vortex. This was none other than his 61st immortal acupoint. With the formation of this immortal acupoint, 2 more time Tao runes had appeared on the mantra-treasured axis. A short while later, the surrounding energy fluctuations gradually subsided, and Han Li slowly opened his eyes, but he was looking more concerned than elated. Even after consuming a fruit that's imbued with time law powers, I was only just barely able to open a single immortal acupoint. How much resources will it take to reach the high zenith stage? With that in mind, a wry smile appeared on his face, but before he had a chance to dwell on this thought, the heaven-controlling vial suddenly flew up on its own. Han Li hurriedly cast his gaze toward his mantra-treasured axis, upon which he was ecstatic to discover that an 11th time law thread had appeared around it. The golden fruit that he had obtained from Gongshu Jiu had allowed him to manifest another time law thread, and that was certainly a pleasant surprise. Furthermore, judging from the reaction of the heaven-controlling vial, it seemed that he was about to be sucked into another vision. Sure enough, a burst of rumbling rang out, and the heaven-controlling vial, which had already swelled to the size of a millstone, released a thick pillar of green light that struck the light barrier around the inner room to form a translucent wall of light. Jin Tong and Xiao Bai were unable to tell what was happening inside due to the light barrier that was in their way, so they could only return to the stone table in a bored manner. A green vortex slowly took shape within the wall of light, immediately following which a burst of tremendous suction force erupted forth, sucking his soul out of his body and into the wall of light in a flash. Han Li's consciousness slowly returned to him, and he opened his eyes to inspect his surroundings. He was already mentally prepared this time, so he wasn't feeling panicked at all. Instead, there was only a sense of excitement and curiosity in his heart. These experiences were extremely precious, and they had always benefited him greatly, while only temporarily costing him the use of his time Tao runes. As he looked around, he was greeted by the sight of several white plazas, which were surrounded by a series of white jade palaces that stretched as far as the eyes could see. There were some mountains hovering in midair, and they were also riddled with palaces. It seemed that he was situated in a large sect. However, at this moment, there was smoke rising up all over the sect, and many of the palaces and hovering mountains in the sky had been damaged, indicating that a battle was taking place. Sure enough, there were countless cultivators locked in battle up above, and they were split into 2 sides, with one side dressed entirely in white robes, while the other side was dressed in golden robes. The golden robes weren't unfamiliar to Han Li, as it was the attire of the heavenly court. The 2 sides were quite evenly matched, and it didn't appear as if a decisive outcome were going to arise anytime soon. After taking in his surroundings, Han Li cast his gaze forward to find that a faint projection of his mantra-treasured axis was hovering in front of him. The time Tao runes on its surface were radiating semi-transparent light, and a couple of them had already faded. The rate at which the time Tao runes was fading was the same as before. He then turned his attention to the body that he had possessed, and he discovered that it was a white-robed cultivator laying in a corner of the plaza. The man was tall and thin with a head of straw-like yellow hair, and his skin was as wrinkled and wizened as the bark of an old tree. It appeared that this was the body of a foreign being. There was a large hole in the man's lower abdomen, and his body had almost been sliced into 2. On top of that, he was laying in a puddle of his own green blood, and he seemed to met his demise quite some time ago. Hold on a second, this man looks so familiar. Where have I seen him before? A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face as he tried to recall where he had seen this man in the past, but was unable to do so. He quickly shook his head to rid himself of that train of thought, then attempted to inspect the man's memories. Right at this moment, a resounding boom rang out in the sky, and the clouds up above began to rapidly revolve, forming a giant vortex in the blink of an eye. The vortex was releasing an earth-shattering rumbling sound, and beams of golden light were shooting out from within it. The golden light was as blinding as the sun, and Han Li was astonished to detect the tremendous law powers imbued within these beams of golden light. This was a type of law powers that was very familiar to him. It was the power of time laws. The time law powers within these beams of golden light was downright unfathomable, and they struck the beholder with a sense of awe and veneration. In contrast, Han Li's time law powers was nothing more than trash. Who could have possibly cultivated the power of time laws to such an extent? Han Li was so astonished by what he was seeing that he forgot to draw upon the members of his host body. All of a sudden, the beams of golden light that had erupted out of the vortex transformed into balls of fire that resembled lotus flowers before raining down from above. One of the golden fireballs descended toward a golden, immortal stage white-robed cultivator, who hurriedly conjured up several layers of protective barriers while shooting back in retreat. However, the protective barriers weren't able to pose any resistance against the golden flames, which passed through them with ease before landing upon the white-robed cultivator's shoulder. The white-robed cultivator didn't even get a chance to cry out before his body rapidly aged within the golden flames before disintegrating into ashes. Han Li drew a sharp breath upon seeing this. Meanwhile, the other golden fireballs also descended toward other white-robed cultivators, avoiding the heavenly court cultivators with unerring accuracy, and in the blink of an eye, close to half of the white-robed cultivators had been reduced to ashes. Right at this moment, a radiant golden cloud rose up from the largest mountain that was hovering in midair, and it gave off rays of dazzling golden light. Han Li was shocked to discover that the golden cloud was also giving off bursts of time law powers. The time law powers radiating from the golden cloud wasn't as formidable as that of the vortex in the sky, but it was still countless times more formidable than Han Li's time law powers. The cloud rapidly expanded to obscure the entire sky in the blink of an eye, keeping all of the golden fireballs at bay. But during the process, the golden cloud was also whittled down significantly. All of a sudden, a rotund red-robed monk appeared above the golden cloud. The monk was extremely tall and portly, resembling a mountain of flesh, and the rolls of flab on his face had reduced his eyes to narrow slits. Han Li's eyes immediately widened in shock at the sight of the red-robed monk. This was the very same lecturing monk that he had once seen through the heaven-controlling vial. Upon catching sight of the red-robed monk, Han Li was also immediately able to recall that the host body that he had possessed belonged to one of the 5 people who had been listening to the red-robed monk's lecture. The red-robed monk was largely expressionless as he made a hand seal and declared, "Let there be wind." A string of azure runes flew out of his mouth, then transformed into an incredibly thick azure tornado, within which countless azure blades of wind were swirling incessantly. The tornado left a series of inky black spatial rifts in its wake, while also sending waves of spatial fluctuations sweeping in all directions as it swept toward the vortex in the sky with devastating power. This is his mantra domain. Han Li was immediately able to identify the ability that had been unleashed by the red-robed monk. It was thanks to overhearing part of the monk's lecture that Han Li had been able to master this ability. However, the mantra domain that he unleashed was nothing more than an illusion, yet this Azure tornado was very much real. By Han Li's own estimates, if he were to be swept up in that tornado, then he would most likely be instantly reduced to a pile of mincemeat. Gusts of howling wind were also sweeping through the White Palace down below, and some of the weaker cultivators on the battlefield were instantly sent flying away. The body that Han Li had possessed was also swept away by the fierce gusts of wind, and this was exactly what he wanted. He hurriedly drew upon the remaining immortal spiritual power in the body, and a layer of yellow light appeared over his body as he vanished into the ground in a flash before fleeing into the distance as quickly as he could. To Han Li's surprise, not much of the body's immortal spiritual power remained, but it was extremely pure, even more so than his own immortal spiritual power. Right at this moment, a burst of golden light flashed within the vortex in the sky once again, and an enormous golden hand appeared. The hand was over 100 acres in size, and at its center was a huge golden halo, which descended from above as the hand came pressing downward while giving off a burst of tremendous time-law powers. The Azure tornado instantly fell completely still, as did the gusts of the ferocious wind that were sweeping through the air down below, as well as all of the other combatants on the battlefield. The red-robed monk above the golden cloud had raised his hands as if he were preparing to unleash some other ability, but he had also been immobilized. Han Li's escape also drew to an abrupt halt, and he had fallen still as well, suspended within the soil underground. Everything in the world had fallen still, and the only thing that could still move was the giant golden hand that was descending from above. As soon as the Azure tornado came into contact with the giant hand, the former instantly disintegrated into countless specks of azure light. Meanwhile, the enormous golden hand continued to descend without pause, then landed upon the red-robed monk in a seemingly gentle manner. Right before Han Li's astonished eyes, the red-robed monk's body also disintegrated just like the Azure tornado. After slaying the red-robed monk, the giant golden hand didn't continue to descend. Instead, it shrank back into the vortex up above in a flash, and in the next instant, everything returned to normal. The cultivators on both sides were a little dumbfounded, unsure of what had just happened, but they then spotted the remains of the red-robed monk falling from the sky. The white-robed cultivators' expressions instantly turned to grief and despair, while the heavenly court cultivators were ecstatic. At this point, the heavenly court cultivators far outnumbered the white-robed cultivators, and morale had also completely plummeted for the latter, so the battle quickly became very one-sided. Deep underground, Han Li was also able to move again in the wake of the disappearance of the giant golden hand. What just happened? Just now, his consciousness seemed to have faded, but it was only for a moment, and he couldn't tell if it had merely been a figment of his imagination. However, he then quickly realized that it hadn't been his mind playing tricks on him, as two of the Time Tao runes on his mantra-treasured axis had suddenly faded. He immediately released his spiritual sense to inspect what was happening on the surface, upon which he noticed that in the place of the red-robed monk now stood a pile of disintegrated flesh. Despite this, Han Li was still able to identify the aura of the pile of remains, and his expression instantly changed drastically upon seeing this. The red-robed monk had just displayed power that was far superior to any cultivator he had ever seen, yet he had been killed in an instant. At this point, the vortex in the sky was also slowly fading, and before long, it had vanished entirely. Han Li was momentarily rooted to the spot, then snapped back to his senses before channeling the immortal spiritual power of his host body once again. However, instead of fleeing further into the distance, he burrowed even deeper into the ground, and only after he was extremely deep underground did he draw to a halt. There, he was finally able to heave an internal sigh of relief before drawing upon his host body's memories. A string of memory fragments instantly surged into his mind, and after sorting through these memories, Han Li discovered that the sect outside was none other than the true mantra sect. According to the host body's memories, this immortal region was called the Black Soil Immortal Region, and it was countless times larger than the northern glacial Immortal Region. As for the true mantra sect, it was the undisputed number one sect of the Immortal Region, and it had been in existence for countless years with innumerable disciples within its boundaries. As for the body that Han Li possessed, it belonged to a man called Mu Yan, who was one of the true mantra sect's 5 grand elders. The red-robed monk was sect master Myro of the true mantra sect, and also Mu Yan's master. He was a great encompassment cultivator who stood at the pinnacle of the Black Soil Immortal Region, and was reverently referred to as Immortal Lord Myro. Aside from Mu Yan, Immortal Lord Myro had 4 other direct disciples, and they were the 4 other grand elders of the true mantra sect, as well as the 4 other people listening to Immortal Lord Myro's lecture from Han Li's vision. As direct disciples of Immortal Lord Myro, all 5 of them were high zenith cultivators. Despite Immortal Lord Myro's unfathomable powers, he had been killed in an instant, so it was clear that the owner of the giant hand was an extraordinary figure. However, the only thing that Mu Yan seemed to be aware of was that this was a significant figure in the heavenly court. As far as Han Li was aware, only a select group of people could kill a great encompassment cultivator with such ease. Could it be the Time Dao ancestor? It was clear that the true mantra sect had been attacked by the heavenly court. It seemed that the sect had ultimately fallen to its demise after Immortal Lord Myro was slain by the Time Dao Lord. Han Li couldn't help but wonder why the heavenly court had been so determined to stamp out the true mantra sect, to the point that even the Time Dao ancestor had been personally involved in the sect's eradication. As one of the 3 paramount laws, the laws of time were fundamentally superior to all other laws with the exception of its 2 counterparts. If it really was the Time Dao ancestor who had slain Immortal Lord Myro, then he was most likely one of a handful of the most powerful beings in the entire true immortal realm. Han Li took a deep breath to compose himself, then continued to browse through Mu Yan's memories, trying to find out more information about the heavenly court. After killing Gongshu Jiu in the Infernal Frost Immortal Manor, Han Li had well and truly become an enemy of the heavenly court. Even though he currently didn't possess the power to oppose the heavenly court, it certainly couldn't hurt to know more about the enemy. Before long, Han Li's heart was pounding with excitement. As a high zenith cultivator, Mu Yan possessed a vast wealth of knowledge and experience, and his memories contained a great deal of information pertaining to the heavenly court. In the past, Han Li had attempted to gather information on the heavenly court, and he was able to uncover some things, but most of the information was publicly available anyway, so it wasn't very useful. Right as Han Li was about to take a closer look at Mu Yan's memories, he was suddenly struck by a rush of dizziness. Alarmed by this sudden onset of dizziness, Han Li hurriedly stopped what he was doing, and only then did the dizziness subside. Could it be because the person I've possessed on this occasion is far superior to me when it comes to cultivation base? Even though he had possessed Mu Yan's deceased body, its memories didn't belong to him, and forcibly scouring through those memories was very similar to performing a soul search technique. Mu Yan had been a high zenith cultivator at his time of death, thereby possessing a far superior cultivation base to Han Li, and even though Han Li's spiritual sense was far superior to that of other mid-golden immortal cultivators, it was still too much of a stretch for a golden immortal to search a high zenith cultivator's soul. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that Mu Yan was already dead, then Han Li wouldn't have been able to get away with only such minor consequences. With that in mind, Han Li could only give up on trying to glean more of Mu Yan's memories, and he began inspecting his surroundings while waiting for his soul to recover. At this moment, he was deep underground, and it wasn't very comfortable having so much soil clinging so tightly to his body. He swept a hand through the soil, and a burst of yellow light instantly spread outward, forming a space that was around 50 to 60 feet in size, forcing out all of the surrounding soil. After that, he sat down with his legs crossed and began to rest and recuperate. The time Tao runes on his mantra treasured axis faded one after another, and only after over 30 of them had been snuffed out did his soul gradually return to its original condition. After that, he continued to search through Mu Yan's memories, attempting to connect the fragmented memories, and he was quickly able to uncover more information about the Heavenly Court. As the most powerful official organization of the entire true immortal realm, the Heavenly Court exerted its control upon all of the immortal regions through immortal palaces, while the Heavenly Court itself was situated in a place known as the Middle Earth Immortal Region. There was indeed a Time Tao ancestor in the Heavenly Court, and he was the most prestigious and long-standing Tao ancestor. Once again, Han Li's soul began to waver, and he was forced to stop for a second time. Who exactly is this Time Tao ancestor? Han Li thought to himself as he took some time to recuperate. Time slowly passed by, and several dozen more of the mantra-treasured Axis's Time Tao runes faded before Han Li was fully recovered once again, and he began to search through Mu Yan's memories for a third time. This time, a grim look gradually appeared on his face, and his expression only darkened further and further. He had finally found some information pertaining to this battle. Theoretically speaking, with a great encompassment cultivator like Immortal Lord Myro at the helm, the true mantra sect should have been able to thrive for the foreseeable future. After all, no one aside from Tao ancestors could reliably defeat great encompassment cultivators. However, unfortunately, Immortal Lord Myro was also the root cause behind the true mantra sect's demise. As it turned out, the Time Tao ancestor had begun to regard Immortal Lord Myro as a threat, and the former had decided to strike before things could get out of hand. As for why Immortal Lord Myro was viewed as a threat, that concerned a secret that very few were aware of. All of the 3,000 great Tao laws were derived from the great Tao of heaven and earth. Just as two tigers couldn't reside on the same mountain, each law could only have a single Tao ancestor, and if a great encompassment stage, Immortal Lord's mastery over a certain type of laws exceeded that of the corresponding Tao ancestor, then the Tao ancestor would be replaced. As for exactly what happened during this process, that was naturally something that wasn't known to a high zenith cultivator like Mu Yan. However, it seemed that all Tao ancestors paid a great deal of attention to cultivators who had mastered the same type of law powers as themselves, particularly when it came to cultivators at or above the high zenith stage. Unless those cultivators were willing to pledge their subordination to the Tao ancestor, they would be eliminated before they could develop their powers any further. Even so, some Tao ancestors had still been replaced in the past, and it could be said that all Tao ancestors had risen to the top by treading upon the bodies of other prospective Tao ancestors as stepping stones. Having already cultivated the laws of time to the great encompassment stage, Immortal Lord Myro posed a significant threat to the Time Tao ancestor, and even though he had done everything in his power to conceal his cultivation base, he was still eventually exposed, thereby leading to the demise of the true mantra sect. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. At the moment, he was still quite far away from the high zenith stage, but wouldn't he eventually also have to worry about being targeted by the Time Tao ancestor? Cultivators really do constantly have the odds stacked against them. For all cultivators who had mastered a type of law powers, the corresponding Tao ancestor was essentially the heavens, and only by overcoming the heavens could one truly reach the pinnacle. However, there was no way that he could currently contend against the heavenly court, so Han Li only considered this subject briefly before casting aside this train of thought to continue searching through Mu Yan's memories. At this point, only a small portion of Mu Yan's fragmented memories were still yet to be inspected, and all of a sudden, an elated look appeared on his face. As it turned out, these remaining memories contained aspects of Mu Yan's cultivation. Just like his master, he had also been cultivating the laws of time, and even though these memories didn't contain the cultivation arts used by Mu Yan, they did contain much of his cultivation experiences and insights. Han Li had never had anyone that he could turn to for mentorship in his progression in mastering the laws of time, so this was exactly what he needed, and he immediately began poring over these memories. A short while later, an intrigued look appeared on his face. He discovered that these cultivation experiences were all very much related to the mantra axis scripture, the illusory dawn treasured scripture, and the water divination time arts. Han Li had always felt like these three cultivation arts were somehow connected, but he had never been able to find the connection. However, through these memories, he seemed to have found some ways to integrate the three cultivation arts into one. Could it be that some type of connection really does exist between the three cultivation arts? After quickly browsing through Mu Yan's remaining memories, Han Li raised his head to look up at the projection of the mantra-treasured axis. At this point, most of the time Tao runes on its surface had already faded, and there were only several dozen that were still lit, indicating that he didn't have much time left. With that in mind, Han Li began to search Mu Yan's body for his storage tools. Presumably, Mu Yan's storage tools had to contain the cultivation arts that he had been using, and if he could find them, then he should be able to uncover the connection between the three aforementioned cultivation arts. However, he quickly discovered that Mu Yan's storage tools were nowhere to be found. They must have been taken by whoever killed him. With that in mind, a disappointed look appeared on Han Li's face. All of a sudden, a burst of intense resentment rose up from within the remnants of Mu Yan's soul at the thought of his killer, and it seemed that there had been some treachery involved. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he sensed this burst of fury, and only after some words of consolation from him did the disembodied burst of anger begin to subside. Could it be that he perished to a sneak attack? The reason that Han Li was speculating this was due to the wound on Mu Yan's lower abdomen. He wasn't able to find out how Mu Yan was killed through his memories, but he could sense a great deal of resentment in the remnants of Mu Yan's soul. All of a sudden, Han Li noticed something on a corner of Mu Yan's sleeve, and he reached out to tear the sleeve apart, revealing a small white silken handkerchief that was riddled with tiny text. The material of the handkerchief was identical to that of his clothes, and it had been concealed very well. If it weren't for the fact that Mu Yan's sleeve was currently stained with blood, Han Li would have failed to notice the handkerchief. After examining the handkerchief for a moment, an elated look immediately appeared on Han Li's face. The passage of the text on the handkerchief contained none other than the mantra domain secret technique, and this was most likely the full version, one that was much more comprehensive and even more profound than the incomplete version that Han Li had derived from Immortal Lord Myro's lecture. He began to pore over the passage of text, and the more he saw, the more stunned he became. The mantra domain was one of the most advanced secret techniques of the true mantra sect, and it was said that upon achieving full mastery of the secret technique, one could speak things into existence and influence heaven and earth with their words. Of course, at the very least, One had to be at the high zenith stage to even have a chance of achieving such miraculous feats, and at Han Li's current cultivation base, he could only use the mantra domain to unleash some illusions. Even so, it had proven to be very useful in several past battles, and if he could use it wisely in conjunction with his time spirit domain, he was confident that it would serve him very well in future battles. Han Li quickly read through the entire passage of text on the silken handkerchief, committing it firmly to his memory, and not a moment too soon as the final time Dao rune on the mantra treasured axis faded almost immediately thereafter. After a rush of dizziness, Han Li's spiritual sense quickly returned to his body. The translucent wall of light in front of him was gradually dissipating, while he looked on with a dazed expression. The vision had shown him what had happened in the final moments of the true mantra sect, while also displaying to him the power of the time Dao ancestor. Even though all of these things had happened in the distant past, Han Li was still reeling from what he had seen. Through cultivating the spirit refinement technique, he had already pitted himself against the heavenly court, and now, his cultivation of the laws of time was eventually going to set him on a collision course with the time Dao ancestor. Even a great encompassment stage mighty figure like Immortal Lord Myro had stood no chance against the time Dao Lord. How was a mere golden immortal like himself going to fare? The time Dao Lord most likely wouldn't even have to lift a finger to kill him. A wry smile appeared on Han Li's face at this sobering thought, but there was no point in thinking excessively about such matters. Inevitably, such a day would come, but for now, he had to focus on becoming more powerful and making it out of the primordial land alive. With that in mind, he flipped a hand over to produce a blank jade slip, then pressed it against his own forehead and recorded the mantra domain secret technique that he had just memorized into it. 3 more months passed by in the blink of an eye. During this time, Nuo Kinglin had visited Han Li to apologize on several occasions, claiming that some major crises had swept through the entire beast race, and that there were many important tribes that were still yet to arrive, so the delivery of the maps that he had been promised was going to be delayed. Han Li had spent this entire time reflecting on Mu Yan's cultivation insights, and even though he still wasn't able to identify the connection between the mantra axis scripture, the illusory dawn treasured scripture, and the water divination time arts, he had developed a better grasp on the laws of time. Hence, this peaceful cultivation environment was perfect for him, and he decided to stay. Inside his secret chamber, Han Li sat with his legs crossed and his eyes closed while channeling the water divination time arts. As he began to chant an incantation, waves of rippling golden light rose up over his body, then converged in front of him to form a ball of golden light. Another week flew by in a flash. Han Li remained seated with his legs crossed while making a string of hand seals, and the ball of golden light in front of him had already become as radiant as a miniature sun. All of a sudden, a golden vial emerged at the center of the ball of light. The vial had a wide bottom that gradually tapered upward, and it had a pair of crescent-shaped handles at its opening. The vial was very blurry, but it was still giving off a profound aura, and as soon as it appeared, all of the nearby golden light instantly surged into it. All of a sudden, the ball of golden light vanished, leaving only the blurry vial projection hovering completely still in midair. Han Li opened his eyes, and as his gaze fell upon the vial projection, a hint of elation and surprise appeared on his face. Initially, he had only been planning to cultivate the water divination time arts a little so that he could get an initial grasp on it, but to his surprise, he had managed to manifest a clear time vial with ease. According to the water divination time arts, this was supposed to have been extremely difficult, and that only someone who possessed exceptional aptitude and a certain degree of mastery over the laws of time could have any chance of manifesting a clear time vial after an extensive period of cultivation. Evidently, this was not the case for Han Li. Was this because he had already established a foundation through his cultivation of the mantra axis scripture, or was there some other factor at play? Han Li pondered this question briefly, before setting the train of thought aside to continue his cultivation. He began to chant an incantation while making a string of hand seals, and two thick beams of golden light shot out of the palms of his hands. There were countless golden runes flashing within the beams of light, and all of them fused into the vial projection, causing it to slowly revolve on the spot while attaining a more and more substantial form. Sometime later, the vial projection had already turned into a semi-transparent vial that appeared as if it were a physical object. Han Li was ecstatic to see this. With that, he had completed the cultivation art's second chapter as well. After taking a deep breath, he moved on to the third chapter. A month later, Han Li conjured up the clear time vial once again, and this time it was a little smaller than before, and countless white star designs had appeared on its surface. Up to this point, Han Li had mastered the cultivation art's third chapter as well. He took a glance at the clear time vial, then closed his eyes once again while making a string of hand seals, and countless specks of radiant golden light began to emerge within his body, every single one of which was giving off astonishing time law power fluctuations. These specks of golden light surged steadily into the golden vial at Han Li's behest, and a series of tiny specks of golden light instantly began to appear within the vial. Close to a year flew by in a flash, and at this point, the clear time vial was already filled with specks of golden light, resembling a translucent bottle that was filled with golden fireflies. Han Li sat completely still on the spot with his legs crossed, and his entire body was basked in a radiant river of golden light, with countless specks of golden light continuing to surge out from within before entering the clear time vial. The vial seemed to have reached its maximal capacity, and all of the specks of golden light instantly began to converge to form a ball. That ball of golden light then vanished into the vial in a flash, manifesting itself as a time Tao rune. At this point, there were already 5 other time Tao runes on the vial. With the addition of this latest time Tao rune, the clear time vial began to buzz audibly, and Han Li suddenly stopped what he was doing, upon which all of the flowing golden light around him quickly vanished. Immediately thereafter, he rubbed his hands together, and the clear time vial vanished as well. The fourth chapter had been far more difficult to cultivate than the third one, requiring one to manifest 6 time Tao runes, but once again, it had barely posed any obstacle to Han Li at all. He rose to his feet and exhaled as he swept a hand through the air to withdraw the restrictions around his cave abode, then made his way over to one of the windows in the outer room. It was late at night at the moment, and there were countless bright stars in the clear sky. Han Li took a glance up above, then made a hand seal, and his clear time vial appeared on the window sill in front of him amid a flash of golden light. The 6 time Tao runes on the vial instantly began to flash, and tiny specks of white light emerged within the moonlight that was spilling in through the window before being drawn into the opening of the vial. Han Li gave a pleased nod upon seeing this. However, the rate of absorption of moonlight was very slow, and at this rate, it was going to take a considerably long time to manifest a time water droplet. Right at this moment, the sound of footsteps rang out from outside, and Jin Tong entered the cave abode while riding on Xiao Bai's back. Her brows were tightly furrowed, indicating that she was troubled by something, and Xiao Bai could sense that she was in a bad mood, so it was making sure to walk very carefully to avoid jostling her. "What's wrong, Jin Tong?" Han Li asked as he stowed his clear time vial away. Jin Tong opened her mouth to say something, but seemed to be rather hesitant. It's all right if you have something on your mind, then tell me. I'll look out for you, Han Li assured with a smile. I've been feeling a very familiar aura. Well, it's not actually that familiar, it's just very similar to mine, like another me, and this aura is currently getting closer, Jin Tong revealed. An aura very similar to yours. Could it be? Could it be another you? Xiao Bai exclaimed before Han Li had a chance to reply. What did you just say? I think you need to have some sense beaten into you, Xiao Bai. Jin Tong snapped as she began rolling up her sleeves. No, what I meant to say is, could it be another gold-devouring immortal? Xiao Bai hurriedly amended with a fawning smile. Why would another gold-devouring immortal be coming here? Can you sense how powerful it is? Han Li asked. It seems to be a little more powerful than I am, Jin Tong replied in a concerned voice. Han Li's expression remained unchanged, but internally he was quite stunned to hear this. At the moment, Jin Tong was already at the late golden immortal stage. So did that mean that a high zenith stage gold-devouring immortal was currently approaching them? Xiao Bai was also very alarmed to hear this, and it urged in a trembling voice, "We have to run, master." As soon as its voice trailed off, the sound of thunderous drumming rang out from outside, and the peaceful valley immediately erupted into action as countless figures rose up into the sky as streaks of light. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. Stay in the cave abode for now, I'll go out and take a look, he instructed, then made his way out of the cave abode. At this moment, more and more beings for the beast race were flying out of the Dark Star Canyon, and they were all flying outside. All of a sudden, a streak of light arrived from afar, then landed in front of Han Li's cave abode to reveal Nuo Kinglin. How has your stay been so far, fellow Taoist Li? Nuo Kinglin asked with a smile. It's been fine, thank you for the hospitality, Chief Nuo. May I ask what's happening right now? Han Li asked. We're being attacked by the insect race, but we already anticipated this and have set up defensive measures, so there's nothing to fear, Nuo Kinglin replied in a confident manner. That's good to hear. May I ask why you've come to visit me then? Han Li asked. We're going to be using the restrictions within the Dark Star Canyon later to unleash a secret technique, and no one can remain in the canyon during this time, so I'll have to ask you to leave the canyon with me, Nuo Kinglin explained. That's not a problem. I'll go pack up my belongings, then come back out to join you, Han Li replied with a nod, then returned to his cave abode, while Nuo Kinglin continued to wait patiently outside. After entering his cave abode, Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he made his way into his secret chamber. The insect race is attacking, and there's a high zenith stage gold-devouring immortal among them. We need to leave right away, master, Xiao Bai immediately yelled in an urgent voice. What do you think, Jin Tong? Han Li asked. I'm sure you already know what happens when two gold-devouring immortals encounter one another, Jin Tong said, and a hint of resolve and killing intent appeared in her eyes. Han Li didn't say anything upon seeing this. While traveling through some other immortal regions with Gongshu Jiu, we ran into some gold-devouring immortals, and at the same cultivation base, they're far more powerful than primordial true spirits. There's no way we can overcome a high zenith stage gold-devouring immortal, so we have to run, Xiao Bai urged. There's no running away from them. Gold-devouring immortals are extremely sensitive to one another, so even if we run, it'll definitely still come after us, Jin Tong replied with a shake of her head. Xiao Bai opened its mouth to say something else, but ultimately decided against it. Just as Jin Tong said, even if we leave this place, that gold-devouring immortal will definitely continue to pursue us, so we may as well stay here and wait for it, Han Li said. A bitter look appeared on Xiao Bai's face upon hearing this, and it reluctantly nodded in agreement. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of azure light that sucked both of them into a spirit beast pouch, then instructed, "Stay in the spirit beast pouch for now." After that, Han Li withdrew the restrictions in the cave abode before emerging outside again. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Chief Nuo," he said. "Not at all, fellow Taoist Li. Please come with me," Nuo Qinglin replied, then flew up into the sky as a streak of light while Han Li trailed along behind him. As they flew through the air, he suddenly turned to a certain direction in the canyon, where there was a ball of churning black chi in the distance. The ball of black chi was situated very far away, but with Han Li's exceptional eyesight, he was able to see that there were dozens of giant stone pillars standing around it to form what appeared to be a formation, which was giving off bursts of spatial power fluctuations, much like a teleportation formation would. Han Li was rather surprised to see this, but he didn't ask any questions, and Nuo Qinglin also displayed no intention of explaining anything to him. Inside Han Li's spirit beast pouch, Jin Tong suddenly said, "Xiao Bai, you once said that you have a space within your body that's completely isolated from the outside world, right?" "That's right, what an exceptional memory you have," Xiao Bai confirmed in a fawning manner. "All right, I want you to eat me," Jin Tong said. Xiao Bai was naturally astonished to hear this, and it immediately began shaking its head vigorously. "You want to use the space in my body to conceal your aura. You can't do that. Living beings can't survive in my internal space, and any living being that enters will quickly be digested. That may be the case for other living beings, but you won't be able to digest me. Hurry up. I'm sure I'll be fine as long as I don't stay in there for too long," Jin Tong urged. Xiao Bai could only reluctantly oblige upon hearing this, opening its mouth to release a burst of suction force that sucked Jin Tong into its belly. Li. Meanwhile, Han Li and Nuo Qinglin quickly arrived outside the Dark Star Canyon. All of the beast race tribes were already prepared for this battle, so they had reacted very quickly, and all of them had emerged in full force, culminating in an army of tens of thousands. Han Li swept his gaze over his surroundings to find that there were around 30 to 40 tribes present, and the long-neck beings were also here, but they were situated near the back. There were also close to 1,000 giant black war chariots that were laden with beast race beings hovering in the sky. These black chariots were giving off a metallic sheen, and there were also numerous glowing black patterns engraved onto their surfaces, giving them an indestructible appearance. Ahead of all of the beast race beings was an even larger army of millions of demon beasts. Somehow, the beast race beings had managed to arrange all of the demon beasts into several organized and uniform units that weren't chaotic in the slightest. Han Li couldn't help but be a little surprised to see this. "What do you think of our beast race army, fellow Taoist Li?" Nuo Qinglin asked with a hint of pride in his voice. "It certainly is a sight to behold," Han Li praised. Nuo Qinglin burst into laughter upon hearing this, then flew up higher into the sky, while Han Li trailed along behind him. Hovering in front of the war chariots was a black platform that was over 1,000 feet in size and shimmering with spiritual light, clearly indicating that it was a powerful treasure. At this moment, there were around 30 to 40 beast race beings standing on the platform, and it seemed that they were important tribal leaders. Nuo Qinglin descended onto the platform with Han Li, and their arrival was immediately met with a furious reaction. "Chief Nuo Qinglin, why have you brought a human primordial hunter here?" Han Li turned to discover that a dark-skinned man who was built like a massive black bear was the one who had spoken. The man was at the pinnacle of the early golden immortal stage, possessing a slightly higher cultivation base than Nuo Qinglin. Meanwhile, all of the other tribal leaders were also glowering at Han Li with animosity in their eyes. There were over 10 golden immortals among them, but all of them were at the early golden immortal stage, while most of the remaining tribal leaders were at the late true immortal stage. Don't be alarmed, everyone. This is fellow Taoist Li Feiyu. He may be a human, but he's not a primordial hunter. Instead, he's only trying to pass through the primordial land en route to another immortal region. And on top of that, he has assisted our beast race, specifically the long-necked tribe in the past, so he's no enemy of ours, Nuo Kinglin hurriedly explained. Nuo Yifen was also present, and she declared, "On the way back from the long-necked tribe, we were attacked by the insect race, and it was only thanks to Senior Li's intervention that we were able to return safely to the Dark Star Canyon." Taj was standing near the edge of the platform, but he made his voice loud and clear as he chimed in. "That's right. Fellow Taoist Li will forever be a friend of our long-necked tribe." Everyone else's expressions eased slightly upon hearing this, but they still regarded Han Li with clear distrust in their eyes. "Don't mind them, fellow Taoist Li. Human primordial hunters are sworn enemies of our beast race, so it's nothing personal against you," Nuo Kinglin said with an apologetic smile. "I completely understand, Chief Nuo. There's no need to look out for me. My powers are very limited, but I can definitely look after myself," Han Li replied with a faint smile. "You're far too modest, fellow Taoist Li. If things take a turn for the worse for our beast race in the upcoming battle, I'll be counting on you to lend us your assistance again," Nuo Kinglin said as he cupped his fist in a salute. All of the other tribal leaders' expressions changed drastically upon hearing this, and the burly dark-skinned man who had spoken earlier exclaimed in a furious voice, "Nuo Kinglin, we are the regal beast race. How could you ask for assistance from a deceitful and honorless human? Brother Ulu, do not forget that the enemy of our beast race is the insect. In order to defeat them, we must recruit all possible allies and unite everyone against a common enemy. I have already spoken to our king about this, and he also approves of my decision," Nuo Kinglin said. The dark-skinned man's temper immediately died down upon hearing mention of their king, while the other tribal chiefs fell silent as well. "You're far too kind, Chief Nuo. I'm just a mere passerby in the primordial land, and I came to your territory by chance to request a map. I certainly wouldn't dare to get involved in a battle between your two races," Han Li replied with a shake of his head. "My sincerest apologies about the map. This is the map that I've managed to compile thus far. Once the final few tribes arrive, I'll give you a complete one," Nuo Kinglin said as he summoned a white bone shard before handing it to Han Li, who accepted the bone shard, then inspected its contents momentarily with his spiritual sense before giving a nod. The bone shard was similar to a jade slip, and it contained a detailed map of the primordial land. There were many missing areas, but it was certainly still much better than nothing. "Also, I'd like to offer you a little something from our beast race in exchange for your services. Once we force back the insect race, we'll be sure to issue an additional reward," Nuo Kinglin continued as he pulled out a bone ring before handing it to Han Li as well. Han Li accepted the ring, then injected his spiritual sense into it to find that it contained roughly 5,000 immortal origin stones. Han Li weighed the bone ring on the palm of his hand for a moment, then said, "Seeing as you're being so sincere, I can offer my services just this once. However, let me make this clear in advance. I won't take any undue risks. If the enemy is too strong, then I'll prioritize my own safety." At this point, 5,000 immortal origin stones was no longer a significant sum for him, but for the Calm Dawn tribe, this was most likely quite a huge expenditure. Most importantly, Han Li had some other intentions and was only pretending to have been roped in by this reward to further his own agenda. The other tribal leaders were furious to hear this. "Why call upon him, Chief Nuo? He's clearly a coward." "Exactly. If you're so scared for your own safety, then don't come to the primordial land. Everyone, we are currently facing a formidable enemy, So let's all look at the bigger picture here. Fellow Taoist Li, proceed as you please, Nuo Kinglan said with a smile, diffusing the situation. Han Li gave Nuo Kinglan a nod, then made his way off to the side. Nuo Kinglan asked Nuo Yifen to keep Han Li company, then began to discuss strategy with the other tribal leaders. Now that Han Li had a chance to take a closer look at the beast race army, he was rather taken aback by what he saw. There were many tribes in the beast race, but 3 tribes clearly stood out in terms of population. One of them was a tribe of extremely muscular, bear-like beings with thick black fur all over their bodies, looking much like Ulu from earlier. The second tribe was the Calm Dawn tribe, and at this moment, almost all of them were riding atop winged giant lizard beasts with large blue bows slung across their backs. The final tribe of beings were extremely similar to humans in appearance, except their skin was green, and each of them had a single green horn on their head. The warriors from these 3 tribes made up close to 70% of the entire beast race army. Nuo Yifen could see the intrigue in Han Li's eyes, and she explained, "Those 2 tribes are the violent bear tribe and the monohorn tribe, both of which are among the 8 holy tribes of our beast race. Chief Ulu is the chief of the violent bear tribe." "What are the 8 holy tribes?" Han Li asked. "Our beast race has many tribes, and the 8 most powerful ones among them are referred to as the 8 holy tribes. Our Calm Dawn tribe is also one of those 8 tribes. It's a pity that only 3 have gathered here. Otherwise, there's no way the insect race would have dared to attack," Nuo Yifen said in a resentful voice. A contemplative look appeared in Han Li's eyes upon hearing this. All of a sudden, he raised his head and cast his gaze into the distance. A burst of thunderous rumbling rang out from that direction, and black line appeared on the distant horizon before quickly expanding in Han Li's field of view. A vast spirit insect army had appeared where heaven and earth met, and it was even more enormous than the army of demon beasts. Behind the spirit insect army was a massive gray cloud with tens of thousands of insect race beings standing atop it, and they also seemed to outnumber the beast race beings. Han Li swept his gaze across the insect race army, and his expression remained unchanged, but he was stunned to discover that the insect race had close to 30 golden immortals, which, once again, far outnumbered that of the beast race. It seemed that the beast race was at a disadvantage in all measures, and unless it had some special tricks up its sleeve, it was most likely going to lose this battle. Grim looks appeared on the faces of all of the tribal leaders upon seeing this, but Nuo Kinglan then declared in a resolute voice, "Chief Ulu, Chief Marlon, Chef Sahan, let's proceed according to the original plan." The 3 of them stepped forward as they were called upon, and Han Li cast his gaze toward them. He already recognized Ulu, standing beside whom was an imposing green-skinned man with a single green horn on his forehead. He was clad in a suit of green armor, and his face and body were riddled with scars. Nuo Yifen informed him that this man was Marlon, the chief of the monohorn tribe. As for Sahan, he cut a very diminutive figure, and his entire body was concealed with a large dark red cloak, thereby hiding his features. The 3 of them cupped their fists in a collective salute toward Nuo Kinglan, then descended from the platform down into the beast race army. Chief Ulu swept a hand through the air, and a crimson giant rhinoceros beast appeared by his side. It was so enormous that it resembled a moving fortress, and it was giving off an extremely formidable aura. Ulu jumped onto the rhinoceros beast's back, then summoned a giant crimson axe, and he was instantly brimming with battle intent. The crimson rhinoceros ascended into the heavens, carrying Ulu into the sky above the beast race army. "Brave warriors of the beast race, our sworn enemies are up ahead, while our tribesmen stand behind us. We must defend the honor of our beast race. It's time to fight," Ulu roared in a thunderous voice, priming the beast race army for the battle to come. Fight, fight, fight! All of the beast race warriors echoed, and the earth trembled in the wake of their collective voices. The violent bear, calm dawn, and monohorn tribes were charging at the forefront, while the army of demon beasts also rumbled forward with tremendous power. As for the insect race army, it accelerated even further upon seeing this. But all of the golden immortals of the insect race had stopped in their tracks to face Han Li and the others from afar. The two armies were like a pair of formidable waves that were crashing toward each other with devastating force, causing heaven and earth to tremble violently. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly upon seeing this. The armies of the two races had filled his entire field of view, and the atmosphere of battle in the air was getting even him a little worked up. Right at this moment, a resounding boom suddenly rang out from behind him, and a series of giant fireballs were launched up into the sky before hurtling toward the insect race army up ahead. One giant fiery cloud after another erupted within the insect race army's ranks, forming a sea of crimson fire that swept up all of the nearby spirit insects before incinerating them into ashes. Han Li turned around to find that these fireballs had come from those black war chariots, at the front of each of which was a thick cylindrical barrel that was glowing bright red. The spirit patterns on the chariots lit up, and a thunderous boom rang out as a fireball that was over 100 feet in size shot out of each of the barrels, before crashing down upon the insect race army. Those are our beast race's fire god war chariots. They're extremely powerful, but the materials required for them are quite difficult to come by, and they're also very difficult to construct. If we could construct 10,000 of these chariots, they would be enough to wipe out the insect race on their own, Nuo Yifen explained, and Han Li gave a slight nod in response. Right at this moment, a series of black shadows that were roughly 1,000 feet in size rose up from the insect race army, then exploded into vast plumes of tiny black shadows before hurtling toward the beast race army at an astonishing speed. These tiny shadows were countless strange insects that were as tiny and sleek as tiny daggers, and they seemed to be extremely sharp. A chorus of agonized howls rang out from the beast race army, as many beast race beings had holes punched into their bodies by these insects, resulting in countless casualties. However, upon piercing through their targets, these insects would also explode and perish themselves. Those are bone needle insects, Nuo Yifen exclaimed with a resentful expression. With Han Li's exceptional eyesight, he was able to see over 100 mountainous black shadows at the back of the insect race army. Each of them was several thousand feet in size, resembling giant silkworm cocoons, and they were constantly rising up into the air one after another. The rate at which these cocoons were releasing bone needle insects was far inferior to the rate at which fireballs were being blasted out of the fire god war chariots, but each cocoon contained an astonishing number of bone needle insects, so there were many that managed to slip through the cracks. This initial clash alone resulted in a huge number of casualties, but not a single warrior backed down. The two armies were rapidly approaching each other, and at a certain distance, the calm dawn tribe warriors suddenly stopped before rising up higher into the sky while raising their bows and knocking arrows. These clearly weren't normal arrows, as evidenced by the blue patterns engraved upon them, and they were shot into the insect race army like rain. Large swathes of insect race warriors and spirit insects were instantly shot down before falling out of the sky, and the arrows were so powerful that some of them even managed to pierce through several insect race beings in succession. Not only that, but after piercing through their targets, the arrows would explode amid bursts of blue light, sending balls of blue flying spraying in all directions. All of the insect race beings that came into contact with the blue flames were quickly reduced to sets of burning skeletons amid blood-curdling howls. The calm Dawn tribe warriors continued to rain down arrows relentlessly, severely ravaging the insect race army. Right at this moment, an ear-piercing screech rang out, and a swarm of golden beings rose up from the insect race army. These golden insect race beings all had wings on their backs and scythe-like arms that appeared extremely sharp, giving them the appearance of humanoid praying mantises. Their wings were flapping rapidly, and they were able to move with extraordinary speed, pouncing at the calm Dawn tribe warriors as streaks of golden light. The calm Dawn tribe warriors were forced to divert their attention to these humanoid praying mantises, which were instantly inundated by a volley of arrows that exploded into a sea of blue fire. However, in the next instant, all of the humanoid praying mantises that had survived the assault flew out of the sea of fire, and even though almost all of them were carrying injuries, most of them had survived as they continued to charge onward, reaching the calm Dawn tribe warriors in the blink of an eye. As a result, the calm Dawn tribe warriors had no choice but to put their arrows away in exchange for long blue sabers to engage in melee combat. "This is bad news," New Yiffin murmured to herself as her brows furrowed slightly. "What's wrong?" Hanli asked. "These are warriors of the Golden Mantis tribe, a major tribe of the insect race similar to the 8 holy tribes of our beast race. They're supposed to be quite far away from here, residing near the Divine Elephant tribe and the Falcon Wing tribe. Similarly, the bone needle insect nests are also very far away from here. On top of that, this attack is also one of a far larger scale than previous attacks," New Yiffin explained. "Are you saying that this is a rather abnormal display of aggression from the insect race?" Hanli asked. "That's right. While our beast race and the insect race have always been sworn enemies, most of the conflicts that take place between us are distributed throughout the land, and there's never been an attack of this scale in a single place before," New Yiffin replied as a concerned look appeared on her face. "That does seem rather abnormal. It's a good thing that you've made ample preparations. Otherwise, this place would have most likely already been conquered," Hanli replied. Right at this moment, the two armies down below finally clashed as well. The violent bear tribe beings were charging at the forefront, and a series of crimson patterns appeared over their brawny bodies, causing them to expand even further in size. The axes that they were wielding were of a similar size to their bodies, and as they were swung through the air, a series of giant crimson axe projections were unleashed. Even with its numbers advantage, the beast race army was unable to oppose the violent bear tribe at all, and the latter tore through the former's ranks, meeting no equal in their path. The other beast race warriors rushed into the hole in the ranks of the insect race army torn open by the violent bear tribe, and they were making rapid inroads. Meanwhile, the bodies of the monohorn tribe warriors began to glow green, and a thick layer of enamel took shape, causing them to also expand drastically in size. At the same time, the horns on their heads had also thickened by roughly twofold, while a series of green patterns appeared upon them. Beams of green light then shot forth from the horns toward the opposing insect race army, and these beams of light possessed tremendous penetrative power, with each one often piercing through the bodies of 7 or 8 insect race beings before finally dissipating. The insect race warriors who were struck by these beams of green light were instantly rooted to the spot and immobilized, reducing them to sitting ducks for the beast race warriors. Even though the monohorn tribe warriors weren't making as bold and violent a statement as the violent bear tribe, the rate at which they were slaying enemies wasn't slower in the slightest. The violent bear tribe and monohorn tribe warriors formed the spearhead of the beast race army, rapidly plunging deep into the insect race army's ranks. Right at this moment, a burst of peculiar screeching rang out from within the insect race army, and the insect race warriors in front of the violent bear tribe warriors suddenly retreated like a receding tide, before countless giant black ants emerged out of seemingly nowhere. Each ant was the size of a millstone with gleaming black bodies that gave off a metallic sheen. Their tiny eyes were glowing an eerie green color, and they presented a harrowing sight to behold. The violent bear tribe warriors roared as they swung their axes through the air, unleashing a flurry of axe projections toward the giant ants. A string of loud clangs rang out as many of the black ants were sent flying, but their bodies were extremely sturdy, and barely any of them were killed. All of the wounded giant ants instantly had their bloodlust ignited, and they began to rush forward once again. The vast colony of black ants formed a black wave that stood in the path of the violent bear tribe warriors, and even more of them were appearing on either flank. The violent bear tribe warriors were still attacking with all their might, but their speed was significantly hampered by these fearless black ants. At the same time, the earth in front of the monohorn tribe warriors began to rumble and churn, and an army of earthy yellow scorpions emerged. Each scorpion was around the same height as a grown man, and what was particularly disturbing about them was that all of them had human faces. The penetrative power of the beams of green light being released by the monohorn tribe warriors was significantly reduced upon striking these human-faced scorpions, and each beam of light was only able to pierce through one scorpion before fading away. Furthermore, the human-faced scorpions were only immobilized for an instant after being struck by the green light, before continuing to charge toward the monohorn tribe warriors. As a result, the progress of the monohorn tribe warriors was also significantly hampered. High up in the sky, the calm dawn tribe warriors were occupied by the golden mantis tribe warriors, so they were unable to assist their fellow comrades. Initially, the beast race army had seized all the momentum, but all of a sudden, they were put in a very awkward situation where neither advancing or retreating seemed like appealing options. The numbers advantage of the insect race army was gradually beginning to manifest itself, and the momentum was rapidly shifting, much to the concern of the beast race tribal leaders watching the unfolding battle from the black platform in the sky. Inform Chief Sahan that it's time to strike, Nuo Kinglin instructed in a grim voice. One of the calm dawn tribe beings beside him immediately vanished from the spot, departing to carry out the instruction. Before long, a red-robed figure shot out from the front lines of the beast race army, then raised both hands to release 3 balls of gray light that appeared above the beast race army in a flash. Immediately thereafter, the red-robed figure began to chant an incantation, and the balls of gray light exploded violently, causing the entire battlefield to tremble violently. 3 mountainous figures abruptly plummeted out of the sky, then crashed down at the center of the insect race army. Countless giant black ants and man-faced scorpions were crushed into mincemeat beneath the enormous weight of these mountainous figures, which were 3 gray-skinned giants that were over 10,000 feet tall. Their upper bodies were completely bared, while their lower bodies were covered up by loincloths formed by countless pieces of beast hide stitched together. Furthermore, each of them was wielding an enormous club that they swung toward the insect race army. These gray-skinned giants were downright hideous, possessing giant faces that only had features of a single huge vertical eye, as well as a completely flat and smooth nose consisting only of 2 nostrils. The massive maces that they were wielding resembled giant pestles that ground down everything in their path into pulp, and countless giant black ants were crushed, upon which vast volumes of fluorescent green fluid erupted out of their bodies. The green liquid spread over the ground, corroding everything in their path to send plumes of white smoke rising up into the air. Following a brief moment of panic, the black ants took a moment to rearrange themselves before charging forward once again, quickly surrounding the 3 enormous giants. The ants then began to climb up the bodies of the gray-skinned giants, tearing viciously into the giant's skin with their sharp mandibles, while more fluorescent green fluid gushed out of the mouths, corroding the giant's bodies in conjunction with the slicing effect for their mandibles. The gray-skinned giants were thrashing around frantically, while attempting to swat the black ants away with their hands, but these things were extremely stubborn and clung on with all their might. Right at this moment, the sound of a loud horn rang out, and a unit of warriors with human upper bodies and zebra lower bodies appeared behind the beast race army. Each of them was holding a large bow crafted from vines, and they were pulling out green arrows that were around half a foot in length each before knocking them on their bows. Their movements were eerily synchronized, and all of them raised their bows to the heavens in unison. As they drew their bowstrings, azure light began to converge from all directions, forming an azure vortex above the tip of each arrow. The arrows were then let loose, shooting up into the sky before raining down upon the insect race army as an azure volley. The gray-skinned giants were extremely sturdy, and even after being ravaged by the black ants for so long, they had only developed some red spots on their skin. As the volley of azure arrows fell upon them, they were able to remain completely unscathed, but the black ants weren't as sturdy, and they exploded one after another. On the other side, over 1,000 beast race demon beasts that were over 1,000 feet tall and clad in thick yellow exoskeletons emerged. Each of them had a pair of thick conical horns on either side of their heads, and they rushed headfirst into the insect race army with tremendous power. The insect race was at a clear disadvantage when it came to strength and physical attributes, and with the majority of the man-faced scorpion army at the forefront crushed into mincemeat, their formation was forced back by several dozen kilometers. However, shortly thereafter, the Vajra spider and gray toad tribe warriors rushed forward to fill the hole, clashing against the beast race army once again. It looks like your beast race has an advantage now, but they're eventually going to run out of steam, and the insect race army far outnumbers you. At this rate, you're going to be defeated, Han Li remarked. It's too early to say that, Senior Li. The battle is only just beginning, Niu Yifan replied in a confident manner. As soon as her voice trailed off, the sound of dull drumming rang out, immediately followed by some type of strange chanting that was erupting all over the battlefield. The language being used for the incantation wasn't the language of the beast race, nor was it the language prevalently used throughout the immortal regions. However, it still struck Han Li as being somewhat familiar. After listening for some time, it suddenly occurred to him what language this was. This seems to be the language of some type of true spirit. Han Li swept his gaze over the battlefield to find that there were several special gray-robed beings interspersed throughout the armies of the violent bear tribe, and the monohorn tribe, and the calm dawn tribe. All of them possessed different statures, but their attire was identical, and each of them was holding a black wooden staff. At this moment, there were many beast race warriors dancing around them, and they were the ones chanting the incantation. These gray-robed figures only formed a tiny part of the beast race army, yet their voices possessed a special penetrative quality that allowed them to be heard across the entire battlefield, and a peculiar atmosphere was beginning to arise.